Chapter 165. It was a thin strip of paper that had very little difference in the length of the name. If one were to look at it casually, they would not be able to see anything strange. But if the transcriber was aware, he would certainly be able to tell. Fan Xian watched as Yang Wanli's paper was pasted with a short strip of paper, and for some reason his mood became extremely good. He smiled and shook his head. He could not help but ask, even if they were picked out, how do I mark them when copying? The official beside him smiled awkwardly. He knew that this newly famous person still did not understand the rules. Carefully he replied, Sir Fan Jr., when copying, as long as you work on the strokes of certain words, the person who approves the scrolls will naturally understand. Fan Xian suddenly understood and sighed in admiration. That way, even if the person marking the paper doesn't know who it is, as long as he knows it's the right person, it's fine. Sir. The official from the Board of Rights replied politely, but in his heart he was cursing this world-shaking young man for not even knowing these old rules of officialdom. What he did not know was that Fan Xian was also cursing these people for being stupid. If it were not for the Qing officials being so arrogant, how could these loophole-ridden old rules have been followed for so many years? He would not have been able to use these loopholes to do things for those true scholars. Of course, he also understood that the reason the entire bureaucracy had always tacitly approved of this method was because, in this matter, whether they were political enemies or not, they had already tacitly approved of this method of dividing watermelons. Aside from madmen, no one in the system dared to cause trouble. In fact, the Eastern Palace, the elders, and even the Prime Minister all had other ways to arrange this matter, but they all came to him at the same time. One reason was because the middleman was responsible for sealing the names, which was an important step in the process. The other reason was that, apart from Prime Minister Lin, the other parties wanted to see what Fan Xian's attitude was. Fan Xian's attitude was actually very simple. Screw you. After all, not everyone was as idle as Fan Xian. After all, not everyone had a good father like Fan Xian, and not everyone had a good mother like Princess Iron Fan. After a busy night, the civil service examination, which could decide the lives of countless scholars, finally came to an end. Many officials rubbed their sleepy eyes and gathered in the main hall, listening to the chief examiner of this year's spring examination, the Minister of Rights Gui Youji's lecture. Gui Yu waved his hand tiredly to dismiss the lower-ranking officials. He then looked kindly at Fan Xian. You have worked hard these past few days, Sir Fan. I wouldn't dare. Fan Xian forced himself to smile. Sir, I wouldn't dare to say that. Besides, I'm still young. Gui Yu smiled and said, everyone has worked hard. Actually, all of the high-ranking officials present understood the inside story of this civil service examination. Gui Yu and the two teachers were not the only ones who had profited from it. Even Fan Xian didn't know that a few days ago, someone had already sent his share of silver to Fan Manor. That sum was even more frightening than half a year's worth of revenue from Dombo bookstore. For several days, the examination hall was filled with the rancid smell of something yellow and white. Fan Xian stood on the stone steps and covered his nose with his hand. He took one last look at the dark hall, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He had been in this world for many years, and all he knew was that he had to live, but he didn't know how he should live. It wasn't until he made up his mind to do this that he realized that being a good person in the general sense felt good. Of course, being a good person didn't mean being a pedantic old man. The officials of the three ministries had already gathered the examination papers. Led by the eunuchs of the palace, and protected by the palace guards and secret agents of the Overwatch Council, they traveled through the capital's almost white night sky toward the Imperial College. Within a few days, the copied papers would be finished and the candidates for the top 3 would be selected. They would then be sent to the Imperial Academy, where the top 3 would be chosen. Fan Xian left the smelly examination hall. A carriage from Fan Manor was already waiting for him at the gate. After getting into the carriage, he accepted a towel from Ting Zijing and wiped his face. He asked tiredly, Father, do you have any objections to what I did? No. Ting Zijing shifted his injured thigh and replied quietly, It's just that the old master seems a little unhappy. He feels that you should have informed the Prime Minister ahead of time. Furthermore, the scope of this matter is too wide. If the public were to become angry, I'm afraid that neither the Prime Minister nor the old master would be able to protect you. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. He still had the Overwatch Council behind him. More importantly, Qin Pingping had Wang Qinian pass on a message that the emperor was preparing to reorganize the government this year. He was just going with the flow. Qin Pingping was probably scolding him for causing trouble on the surface, but he was secretly pleased that he finally had a reason to make a move. Fan Xian only needed to provide the Overwatch Council with a reason, and then the council would present this reason to the emperor for him to make a decision. As for the crown prince and Ning the talented, Fan Xian had other plans. Earlier, when he had copied the names, Fan Xian had chosen a few talented names to hide, regardless of whether they were from the Eastern Palace or from the Great Prince. He had protected them, and it could be considered an explanation to the other party. When the matter came out, Fan Xian wanted people to feel that he had done this not because he was biased towards one side of the government, but because he was a pure scholar who had made a noble and crazy decision based on some rotten obsession. In the following days, the capital was calm. Since Fan Xian had already revealed the truth, the hidden powers of the Overwatch Council began to cooperate. At least before the list of the top 3 came out, no shocking news spread through the officialdom. In the end, the people that Fan Xian had secretly stuffed into the top 3 were not eliminated. It was clear that in the Imperial College and the Ministry of Rights, there were spies from that terrifying old man Qin Pingping, secretly helping Fan Xian hide. As for Gu Yu and the other high-ranking officials, perhaps because they had been too used to cheating in the exam hall in the past few years, and because they had masters like the Eastern Palace behind them, they clearly didn't pay enough attention and didn't see such an obvious problem. On the 22nd of the second month, the spring branches on both sides of the road gradually unfurled, and the birds on the branches flew in pairs. It was a joyous time of spring. In an inn on the west side of the capital, not far from the Imperial College, students from all over the country who were waiting for news gathered downstairs in a panic. There was no wine or food on the table because these students were not in the mood to eat and drink at the moment. All of their thoughts were focused on gathering information. No chance. A student from Shandong Road smiled bitterly and shook his head. I think there's still no chance this time. Brother Jolin, why do you say that? The student sitting next to him had a slightly dark expression. It was Yang Wanli, the one who had met Fan Xian's eyes during the exam. He came from Quanzhou and often made a living by the sea. He was very different from those gifted scholars who were born into nobility and spent the first half of their lives in the study hall. It could be seen that his mood was very relaxed. He picked up a pair of vinegar-soaked peanuts from the table and ate them. As he chewed, he said unclearly, Brother Jolin is a famous figure in Shandong Road, and his treatises are brilliant. A few days ago, after everyone read them, they were full of praise. As for me, I'm not good at this and I'm not good at writing. Although I'm confident that I'll be able to make it to Muling County, I'm sure I won't be able to make it onto the list. Qing Jolin came from Shandong Road, and this was his 3rd time participating in the exam. He smiled bitterly and lowered his voice. Don't tell me you and I don't know these things. There are only so many candidates for each exam. The high-ranking officials in the court ask for a few, the palace decides on a few, and the Imperial College chooses a few. Outsiders like us may have some fame in our hometown, but what are we in the capital? Even if the court wanted to find a few talented people to serve as foils to shut the mouths of the scholars, there are plenty of famous scholars in the capital to choose from. How could it be us? The other scholar at the table had a lean face, and he did not seem to be a man of fortune. Perhaps he had drunk too much and there was something in his chest that he could not release, so he spoke very boldly. He laughed coldly. Brother Jolin is correct. I think it would be best if there were no more imperial examinations in the future, so that you two would not have to waste so much money on travel expenses. What bullsh *T exam? It's just the high-ranking officials in the court choosing their own dogs. Qing Jolin's face darkened, and then he became slightly afraid. He advised, Brother Jichong, keep your voice down. If the secret agents of the Overwatch Council hear us, not only will our careers be ruined, I'm afraid even our lives will be in danger. Brother Jichong's surname was Ho, and he was also a strange man who did not like to walk the path of the rich and powerful. Although he had a bit of a reputation in the capital and had always been as famous as his own way because of his sharp tongue and personality, he had always been a little lonely. Hearing his friend's worried words, he could not help but laugh. Although the Overwatch Council is frightening, how could those secret agents look up to small fry like us? If they were really that powerful, why didn't they keep an eye on the cheating cases in the exam hall? Yang Wanli shook his head. Although the Overwatch Council has always had a bad reputation when it comes to supervising officials, they are very useful. Ho Ji-chang waved his finger. How can there be an innocent official in the government? If we place our hopes on the Overwatch Council, isn't that asking a tiger for its skin? Yang Wanli retorted. Officials are also chosen from among the scholars. How can they all be bad people? I think. For a moment he could not find any famous officials in the capital who were known for their innocence. He could not help but feel a little hesitant. After a while his eyes suddenly brightened. I think Master Fan Xian of the Imperial College is a very good official. His two friends beside him naturally knew that Yang Wanli had been caught by Master Fan Jr. carrying something in his clothes. They could not help but make fun of him. So letting you finish the exam makes you a good official? That's a little too simple. The three of them joked for a while more, and as the wine went to their heads, they could not help but start cursing the abuses of the court in a low voice. They returned to what they had been talking about before. If the Overwatch Council was truly willing to investigate the cheating cases, perhaps the atmosphere in the exam hall would actually improve. At that moment they suddenly heard a commotion outside the inn. The three of them stood up curiously and heard a scholar roar in ecstasy. Cheating in the exam hall. Gui Yu, the minister of the Board of Rights, has been stripped of his position and thrown into prison. There was a loud bang. Spring thunder roared above the capital, and a fresh spring rain fell on the bodies of the students inside and outside the inn. Chapter 166. Sparse raindrops fell around the inn, accompanied by the sound of spring thunder from time to time. However, those students seemed to be stunned, standing stupidly in the drizzle outside the inn. This alley was a gathering place for students from outside the capital on their way to the examination, so there were a lot of people here. After the previous shout, the crowd immediately fell into a strange silence. After a long time, some people finally came back to their senses and surrounded the student who had shouted before. After a long period of noise, it was as if an explosion had occurred. All of them were asking at once what had happened. Ho Ji-chang and Yang Wanli also showed expressions of excitement, but they suppressed the impulse in their hearts and only walked to the railing to listen to the conversation. There were too many people asking questions, but only one person answered. After a long time the three of them finally understood. Last night, the first bureau of the Overwatch Council had sent out over 100 secret agents. They had split into 5 groups and headed straight for Guo Manor in the south of the city. 4 groups had gone to 4 other residences and captured 4 Jiangnan students. Because they had moved so quickly, the news was covered up for the entire night. It was not until morning that the emperor announced lightly that he had already issued an edict ordering the Overwatch Council to investigate the examination hall fraud case. The court was immediately thrown into chaos. Only now did the officials know why Gui Yu, the Minister of Rights, was not among the group. The only ones who were truly calm were the Prime Minister, the Minister of Revenue, and of course, Qin Pingping of the Overwatch Council, who had yet to attend court. This time the Overwatch Council had acted quickly and accurately, especially the group that had captured the 4 Jiangnan scholars. On the spot they had found letters between them and other officials, and in Guo Manor, they had seized an astonishing amount of silver. According to the preliminary results of the investigation, the 4 Jiangnan scholars were all from powerful families, and 3 of them were salt merchants. This time they had brought large amounts of gold and silver to the capital for the examinations, and after a lot of effort, they had finally found Minister Guo's tutelage. Gui Yu had already entered the prison of the Overwatch Council, and the 4 Jiangnan scholars had become pitiful guests. Since yesterday, the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council had begun to order the Jiangnan branch to arrest them, in order to make sure the case was irrefutable. Because these 4 Jiangnan scholars had nominally bribed the chief official of the spring examination, Minister Guo, in reality, most of the money had been sent to the Eastern Palace. Thus the final background of this case was the Crown Prince. Of course, the students knew nothing about these details. They only knew that they were cursing Minister Guo in the rain, not even sparing the poor Minister Guo's mother and son. It seemed that His Majesty was determined to thoroughly investigate the exam hall fraud case. Other than the Ministry of Rights, there were at least a dozen other officials who had been suspended from their duties pending investigation. According to rumors in the Jianghu, the reason why the investigation had been so quick and accurate was all because of a blacklist. On that list were the names of the scholars who had colluded with the court officials during the spring examination. The Overwatch Council had used the scholars to make their own deductions, and the results were excellent. Somewhat shocked, Ho-ji-chung walked back to the table from the railing. He raised the wine cup and poured it down his throat. Seemingly unaware of the spiciness of the wine, he said absent-mindedly, "I didn't expect this, I really didn't expect this." Didn't expect what? Yang Wanli and Qing Jialin had not yet recovered from this shocking news, and they asked without thinking. Ho-ji-chung laughed and slapped the table heavily. "I didn't expect the Overwatch Council to act so accurately and so ruthlessly, to be able to get their hands on a list that could put the nobles of the court to death." He picked up the wine pot and filled the cups of his two friends. He raised his cup in invitation and said excitedly, "Come, let's drink to the Overwatch Council." Cheers. Yang Wanli and Yang Wanli didn't say anything else. They raised their cups in excitement. At that moment, the inn was filled with excited young scholars, inviting people to drink to their heart's content. The kingdom of Qing had been corrupt for a long time. Although everyone knew that it was impossible to completely change the situation by simply catching a minister of rights, as the saying goes, a journey of 10,000 miles begins with a single step. As long as His Majesty had discovered a problem and was willing to solve it, these young, energetic and perhaps even naive scholars all believed that the future of the kingdom of Qing would become better. After a long time, the drunkenness slowly crept into his chest. Yang Wanli's eyes were glazed over and he laughed somewhat foolishly. "How satisfying. Even if I don't pass this time to be able to witness such a shocking event, it can be considered satisfying." Qing Jialin drank less and he was also the most sober. He had always been passionate about his career and he hesitantly asked, "Since the exam hall fraud case has been uncovered, then, will there be a retake of the exam this time?" "There won't be." On the contrary, after drinking a few pots of wine, Ho-ji-chung's thin face appeared calm, and his eyes became very clear. "This is only a warning from His Majesty and there are precedents. 12 years ago when the world was first settled, there was also an incident in the exam. That year, 14 officials of the Board of Rights were executed, but the results of the exam were still announced as usual. Only those students who had relations with the officials were removed, and those who came later took their places. Then, doesn't that mean we have a chance?" Yang Wanli laughed foolishly. With his pure nature he thought of the problem very simply. There are only so many places in the top 3. Once those who took the dishonest path are removed, our chances will be much better. Ho-ji-chung laughed coldly. If it weren't for the fact that there were even more noble people involved, Minister Gua, who was only a minister, would not dare to tamper with the nation's grand ceremony. Those nobles would probably want to protect even more students, but they only removed 4 salt merchants' sons. What good would that do for the bigger picture? The other two thought to themselves that it was indeed so, and they couldn't help but feel a little sad. After a while, Yang Wanli suddenly slapped the table and laughed. "No matter what, this is still something to be happy about. Last year the most sensational thing in the capital was that speech, which forced the eldest princess to return to Xinjiang. This year the most sensational thing is probably this blacklist which actually overthrew a minister of the court." Qing Jialin looked worried. "Let's wait until the top 3 are out tomorrow," he said. Ho-ji-chung and Yang Wanli knew his temperament, and that he still had some illusions about this year's imperial examinations. They smiled and ignored him. "I have to go pull that kid Chanli out of bed and tell him the good news." Yang Wanli laughed. "Remember to have him buy some food." "Beautiful, very beautiful." Fan Xian lightly flicked the paper that Wang Qinian had brought over. He was in a great mood. Wan'er sat next to him and said with some worry, "Aren't you worried that the crown prince will find out that you were the one who exposed the cheating?" Today Fan Xian, who had been severely reprimanded by his father, was for the first time grounded. He could only obediently stay in the manor. He knew that what he had done was indeed somewhat absurd. Of course, if he hadn't received news from the council beforehand that the emperor was planning to make an example of him this year, Fan Xian would not have dared to become this tainted witness and make an enemy of the entire court. In truth, the list of names was not much of a secret. Fan Xian had a few slips of paper in his hands, and all the advisors had a few slips of paper in their hands. Just by looking at this kind of open and above-board cheating, one could tell that the Qing bureaucracy had long since become accustomed to it. It was precisely because of this that the Overwatch Council's investigation this time was unexpected. For a moment, no one would suspect Fan Xian's head first. Hearing his wife's question, a strange expression appeared on Fan Xian's face. He said, "Your crown prince is too daring and his methods are terrible. The entire court is also a group of daring idiots. Cheating in the spring examinations is a big deal, and yet it has been made known to the whole world. Even if I didn't report it, if His Majesty wanted to investigate, would they still be able to hide it?" Crawled out of bed and looked at his face calmly. "Husband, don't take such risks in the future. There is no wall in this world that can withstand the wind. If people find out that you had something to do with this, what will you do in the future?" "What will I do?" Fan Xian made another witty remark that his wife did not understand. He smiled and said, "So what if they find out?" Wanner sighed. She thought that her husband was well-educated and well-mannered. He looked calm on the outside, but no one could predict when he would do something so crazy. Fan Xian knew that his wife was worried about him. He quietly said, "The key to this matter is still in the palace." "What is the imperial examination?" "It is a way for His Majesty to gather talents for himself. In the previous dynasty, there was an emperor who laughed during the imperial examination and said that all the heroes of the world had fallen into his net. His Majesty can tolerate the officials of the court using the imperial examination places to exchange for wealth, but he cannot tolerate all the places being used for ill-gotten gains. Furthermore, both the Crown Prince and the Great Prince have interfered in this matter. Our uncle the Emperor has to ask himself, what are his two sons trying to do?" Did not quite understand. She asked curiously, "Of course they want to cultivate their own power in the future." Fan Xian smiled and continued to ask, "Then His Majesty will have to ask, why do you want to cultivate your own power? The Great Prince is someone who leads an army. What does he need such a large power in the court?" Smiled bitterly and said, "What about the Crown Prince? He is the heir to the throne of a country. Cultivating talents is acceptable. After all, he is going to be the emperor who will control the country in the future. In the past, when I listened to the Grand Tutor's lectures in the Eastern Palace, the Grand Tutor once said that the Eastern Palace cannot do nothing. He must not be afraid of rumors. He must first prepare some officials for future use. This is true loyalty and filial piety." Fan Xian shook his head and revealed a faint sneer. He said, "The Grand Tutor's essay is probably good and his reasoning is certainly correct. But the problem is that His Majesty is healthy. The Eastern Palace is now beginning to cultivate talents. His Majesty must ask himself, is the Crown Prince anxious?" Chapter 167. Wanner sucked in a breath of cold air. She realized that this was indeed the case. She heard Fan Xian continue with a smile. "That is why His Majesty can endure it for a while, but he cannot endure it forever. He can endure the officials, but he cannot endure his own son. If His Majesty does not want to think about it, then so be it. But once he starts thinking about the first problem, he cannot help but suspect many things. So it is only natural that he will clean up the exam hall scandal." Lin Wanner leaned her head against his chest. "Actually, these things are simple. If I want to think about it, I can understand it. Why can't the Crown Prince and the others understand?" "It's not that they don't understand. It's just that the Crown Prince has begun to feel insecure." Fan Xian thought of the gifts the Emperor had given to the three princes at the beginning of the year. The deeper meaning contained within was something even Fan Xian could not understand. Presumably, regardless of whether it was the Crown Prince or the Great Prince, they were both frightened and uneasy. That was why they had stretched their hands so far on the exam field. Lin Wanner sighed. "I do not wish for you to become a king. I only wish to be a free and unfettered marquis. These things are always troublesome. To be rich and idle is my wish," Fan Xian replied with a smile. Thinking of Jia Baoyu's nickname, he continued, "It's just that there are some things I can't get used to and there will always be some suspicion. Who told me and my father to have such bad names?" Seeing him tease her father, Lin Wanner could not help but laugh. She paused and asked, "Father should be fine, right?" "Don't worry. Father went to the Prime Minister's manor that night." He shook his head and sighed in admiration. "That's why I said that the Overwatch Council has handled this matter beautifully. Look at the officials who have been caught recently. Other than Minister Gua, there are people in the Eastern Palace and the Bureau of Military Affairs who have all fallen from their horses. Although my father-in-law has lost a right assistant minister, he hasn't been hurt to the core. This sense of propriety, if it wasn't done by an old hand who has been immersed in officialdom for decades, couldn't have been mastered to such perfection. Is it difficult? Lin Wanner asked with a smile. Fan Xian ran his fingers through his wife's black hair. Very difficult. You have to hurt those powers but not let them die of pain. Otherwise, the emperor will not be able to handle it. After saying this, a faint look of worry appeared on his face. What's wrong? The attentive Wanner hugged her husband's arm tightly and asked with concern. Fan Xian shook his head, trying to get rid of that hidden worry in his heart. I had originally thought that this scandal would not be able to be hidden from the world, so I was prepared to fight a hard battle. I didn't expect the Overwatch Council to cover me so well. But you're right. There are no concrete walls in this world. The Eastern Palace will eventually find out about my relationship with the Overwatch Council. Furthermore, there are too many madmen in the Qin Kingdom. Right now, I am worried about that crippled madman. Qin Pingping. Lin Wanner immediately knew who he was talking about, but she didn't know what connection her husband had with the Overwatch Council other than exposing the fraud. So she had some doubts. Her doubts were so strong that they overshadowed the words, cement wall. Fan Xian smiled and did not explain the matter completely. He only quietly said, I'm worried that Qin Pingping never wanted to hide this matter from the beginning. How dare he? Every girl liked their husband to be a hero filled with a sense of justice. So when Fan Xian secretly exposed the fraud, although Lin Wanner was worried, her heart was filled with satisfaction and pride. Hearing that Qin Pingping wanted to push her husband to the world, she thought of the danger and trembled. She snorted and said, Tomorrow I will go to the palace to find the Empress Dowager. Fan Xian laughed and comforted her. Even if Qin Pingping is pushing me out, I'm afraid he doesn't have any bad intentions. Lin Wanner did not understand, but Fan Xian knew that this was a good opportunity. After the banquet, if he wanted to firmly establish his reputation among the people of the Qin Kingdom, this scandal was undoubtedly the best opportunity. According to what Fei Jie had said, since his mother's close comrade Qin Pingping had always been unwilling to let him be a rich man in the palace treasury and insisted on letting him take charge of the Overwatch Council, then according to Qin Pingping's legendary personality, it was not impossible for him to use the scandal to suddenly jump out of the crowd. The problem was, what was the ratio of gain to loss? Fan Xian was still a bit uncertain. He climbed out of bed and looked out the window at the light rain. Only then did he realize that it was almost noon. He and his wife had been in bed for most of the day. He couldn't help but smile sweetly, but his smile was a bit tired. This time he exposed the fraud case first because he really pitted those truly talented scholars, second because he was angry that those princes were using him as a rope, and most importantly because he wanted to test Qin Pingping one last time. Fan Xian was going to Northern Qi, so he had to know what attitude that terrifyingly powerful old man of the Overwatch Council had toward him. At the same time, he wanted to see clearly what attitude the emperor behind the old man had toward him. Attitude determined everything. Attitude determined relationships. Attitude could reveal history. It could reveal one's past. Fan Xian slightly narrowed his eyes. Through the glass window that had been branded with his mother's scent, he looked at the dark clouds in the sky. He felt that everything in the Qin Kingdom was like an interesting brain teaser, and he seemed to be walking on a path that was infinitely close to the truth. Perhaps his goal was already very close. Outside Fan Manor, on the slightly damp street, an unmarked carriage was quietly waiting. Suddenly, a figure floated out from inside like a falling leaf. Just as he was about to land, his right hand rested on the edge of the carriage, and his whole body was already inside. Let's go, Fan Xian said as soon as he sat down. Ting Zijing looked back at the young master from the driver's seat and smiled bitterly. Young master, if the old master knew you were going out at this time of the year, he would teach me a lesson. Fan Xian's smile became even more bitter. If we don't hurry, not only will the old master use a stick to beat this unfilial son of mine, but even that gentle mistress of yours will use a rope to tie me up. At this time of year, everyone in the capital was in a state of panic. The news that Gu Yu, the director of the Board of Rights, had been arrested and imprisoned had spread throughout the capital in just 2 hours. All the officials involved in the spring examination were restless and stayed at home, afraid that a spy from the Overwatch Council would knock on their door and politely invite them to tea. And Fan Xian was a key figure in the fraud case. Count Sinan, Fan Jian and Princess Chen, who knew the inside story, did not dare to let him act. So he had to sneak out and sigh. Ting Zijing, it's fortunate that I have you as a confidant in the capital. Otherwise, it would be difficult for me to even go out. Wang Qinian, who had been sitting quietly by his side, clearly had the most bitter smile on his face. Sir, I have always wanted to work hard to become your confidant. Fan Xian laughed and teased him. Wang Qinian, you should go do crosstalk. The whip cracked and the black carriage slowly moved forward. The wheels rolled over the puddles of water on the street. The green trees around them were washed by the rain, appearing even more green and tender. Behind the carriage were a few secret agents of the Overwatch Council wearing raincoats. They followed the carriage from a distance. They were all from the Qinian unit responsible for Commissioner Fan's safety. What if there are officials in the court seeking revenge? I don't have enough people here. Wang Qinian knew what Fan Xian had done with the council and was a little worried. Fan Xian smiled and a chill appeared in his eyes. Things are different now and the place we are going to is not Nilan Street. I want to see, other than that crazy woman, who else would dare to assassinate me in the capital, right under His Majesty's nose? Where are we going? Ting Zijing asked in a low voice, not turning his head. Fan Xian looked at Wang Qinian and Wang Qinian whispered a name, then explained. Coincidentally, the students you have taken a liking to are all staying in the same inn. The carriage stopped outside Ye Alley. It was still drizzling. After Fan Xian alighted, he and Ting Zijing walked in, paper umbrellas in hand. Wang Qinian had long since disappeared into the crowd. Ye Alley was a place where scholars from other counties gathered in the capital. Today the exam hall fraud case had broken out in the capital, so it was still a cauldron of voices. Fan Xian raised his umbrella and carefully walked along the street, leaning slightly outward to prevent the rain from falling into the pots of the hawkers sheltering under the eaves of the street. Excuse me, excuse me. A thin scholar hurriedly shouted, carrying 2 jugs of wine in his hands. He brushed past Fan Xian and Ting Zijing, rushing forward, unafraid of the rain falling from the sky. But as he passed, he turned his head to look at Fan Xian. Fan Xian raised his umbrella and watched the man disappear into the rain. He shook his head and laughed. Isn't this just like the bunch of crazy people who graduated? Once the exam was over, they would get drunk. He smacked his lips, a little regretful that he hadn't been able to attend the school's graduation banquet because of his health. Ting Zijing didn't quite understand, but he still explained respectfully. I guess it's because of Guiyu's downfall that these students are so excited. Is Minister Guo's reputation that bad? Fan Xian casually walked forward, looking like a young master who liked to take a stroll in the rain. Ting Zijing laughed. Not many of the capital's officials have a good reputation. There's a saying in the village. If you line up the officials of the 6 ministries and behead them, it's likely that one of them will be innocent. Fan Xian laughed. In his previous life there was also a joke like this. Then do you think my father was the one who was innocent? Everyone knew that Count Sinan had been an assistant minister in the Ministry of Revenue and later a minister. Who knew how much money he had taken from the national treasury? In terms of corrupt officials, Fan Xian's father and father-in-law would probably be in the top 3. But Ting Zijing didn't dare say this. Hearing the young master's question, cold sweat began to drip down his back. He smiled bitterly. Young master, I misspoke. Please don't take it to heart. What are corrupt officials afraid of? The world doesn't worry about corrupt officials, but they worry about corrupt and incompetent officials. Young master, your words are inappropriate. Suddenly, someone unceremoniously squeezed into Fan Xian's umbrella to shelter from the rain. In his hand was a paper-wrapped roast chicken. The slightly charred aroma of the roast chicken couldn't be drowned out by the rain. Chapter 168. The rain continued to fall. The umbrellas among the pedestrians in the alley were like a few pitiful flowers blooming. Fan Xian smiled slightly and glanced at this impetuous young man. He found that the other party was already drenched, so he didn't say anything. If the other party really was a bad person, in that instant Fan Xian had at least 5 ways to immediately incapacitate the other party. Clearly he was just a poor scholar buying roast chicken to make up for the banquet. Fan Xian didn't stop. He raised his umbrella and walked forward. He walked confidently, and the young man who had squeezed into the umbrella also walked confidently. Without a word, he stood to Fan Xian's right and used his cloth umbrella to block the sky above his head. His demeanor was calm as he followed. Like this, they walked dozens of steps under the umbrella. Fan Xian increasingly felt that the young man's temperament was rather cute. If he was a normal scholar, he wouldn't have so rashly squeezed under someone else's umbrella. Furthermore, he walked silently for dozens of steps without a trace of discomfort. So he tilted his head slightly and carefully looked him over. He found that the young man's appearance was rather ordinary. However, his eyebrows were very thick. It was as if someone had used a brush to paint them thickly. Ting Zijing followed 2 steps behind. The 2 people under the umbrella continued to walk silently. It was unclear whether they were competing in patience or something else. In the end, it was Fan Xian who smiled and asked, "I said earlier that it was inappropriate. What was inappropriate?" Seeing that the owner of the umbrella had spoken, the young scholar smiled politely and said, "If an official is corrupt, he naturally won't put his mind on political affairs. If you want a corrupt official to be capable, I'm afraid this in itself is a very laughable matter." Fan Xian smiled and found that the umbrella could not hold the 2 of them. The young scholar's right shoulder was already wet. So he quietly shifted the umbrella over to the other side and replied, "Even if a corrupt official is negligent in political affairs, it is still better than someone who doesn't know anything and blindly messes around after becoming an official." The young scholar raised his eyebrows as if he didn't understand. As long as he is willing to work, it is better than neglecting political affairs. Fan Xian's hand tightened around the umbrella handle. He shook his head and said, "If a river dike is not repaired, it will probably break every few years. If an honest official who doesn't know how to work the river works blindly repairs the dikes, perhaps there will be a few quarrels every year. Do you think the commoners living along the river hope that the county is an incompetent and diligent official, or an incompetent and lazy corrupt official?" The young scholar was momentarily at a loss for words. After a long while, he chuckled and said, "I'm afraid this is also a special case. There are always some things that a government official must do, such as measuring the fields and distributing grain, providing disaster relief to the people and adjudicating cases in prisons. If he is a lazy official, I'm afraid that his administration will also be in a mess." Fan Xian smiled and said, "So the key lies in ability, not purity or greed." Actually, this view of his was not necessarily correct. It could be said that he had been influenced by the official novels of his previous life. But this kind of argument was quite fresh among the people of the kingdom of Qing. The young scholar who shared the umbrella with him couldn't help but be interested. He asked, "If an official has ability but is extremely corrupt, does the court just let him be?" For some reason, when Fan Xian heard this, he thought of his own father-in-law, the famous evil prime minister of the kingdom of Qing, Lin Ruofu. Everyone knew of his greed, but His Majesty knew of his ability, and so he continued to use him. Thinking of the young scholar's question again, he could only shake his head and say, "Governing officials is a difficult and complicated matter. There is no simple and effective way. But if we only ask for the court's supervision and self-cultivation, then we can extravagantly hope that the officialdom will be clean and tidy. If the court strengthens its supervision, can't it prevent corruption?" The young scholar frowned, his thick eyebrows squeezed together like rafters. "Let's say that Gu Yu, the Minister of Rights, has already been imprisoned. If the Overwatch Council had been like this a few years ago, the atmosphere in the exam hall would have been corrupted to what it is today." Fan Xian actually didn't have much of an opinion on politics, but deep in his bones he was not afraid of harming the country. His interest was piqued, and he continued, "If Director Chen of the Overwatch Council bribed Gu Yu and allowed his nephew to be recorded as a first-class official, then who do you think will supervise this matter?" The young scholar didn't think much of it. "Of course there will be His Majesty, who is as sharp as lightning." Fan Xian was even more unconvinced. How could it be so easy for one person to rule the world? In fact, he knew that the emperor must have some secret means to keep the Overwatch Council in check and balance. These means might even include the power that his father had never revealed. But some of the inexperienced political ideas of his previous life made Fan Xian scoff at the emperor's work. He never thought that the emperor, who saw the world as a juicy piece of meat in a bowl, would have the spirit to care about all the injustices in the officialdom. Casually talking, the 2 under the umbrella arrived outside an inn. The young scholar smiled warmly. Thank you for your gift, master. I have arrived. Fan Xian tilted the umbrella to one side and glanced at the name of the inn. Coincidentally, it was also the place he was looking for. He smiled. I'll go in with you. I'm going to the inn to find someone. The name of the inn was very common but also very common. Tongfu Inn. When he entered the inn with the young scholar, he learned that his name was Shi Chanli, who was also an examinee entering the capital. But it was not convenient for Fan Xian to say his name, so he only told the other that his surname was Fan. Who are you looking for, Master Fan? Only now did Shi Chanli realize from the young man's clothing that he must be the son of an influential family. His words were not as unrestrained as they had been under the umbrella, but more reserved. I'm here to visit a friend. It's not convenient for us to talk. If fate wills it, we will meet again. Having said this, he bowed to Fan Xian and walked to the corner of the inn's front hall. There was a wine table there. Next to the table were two people who looked like students competing with each other. Next to them was someone who was already drunk and unconscious, sleeping on the table. Seeing that there were no dishes on the table, it seemed that they were waiting for Shi Chanli's roast chicken. Fan Xian squinted and saw that the drunk person at the table was Yang Wanli, whom he had come to visit. He smiled and followed Shi Chanli to the table. Shi Chanli didn't know that Fan Xian was still behind him. He put the roast chicken, wrapped in oil paper, on the table and laughed at the two people who had stopped competing. Ho Jichang, he said, you called me to bring food but you didn't leave me some wine. Ho Jichang smiled and said, this wine of mine is a low-quality wine that I bought from the alley earlier. Although the taste is not good, the quantity is sufficient. Let me introduce you, this is the scholar from Shandong Road, Qingjialan. Just as he reached out his hand in Qingjialan's direction, he was surprised to find a smiling, handsome young man standing behind Shi Chanli. This young man looked somewhat familiar. Brother Shi, who is this? Ho Jichang asked. Shi Chanli was startled. He turned his head to find that Fan Xian had followed him to the wine table. Master Fan, he said with a wry smile, I only borrowed half an umbrella. There's no need to charge me for shelter from the rain. Fan Xian could see that Shi Chanli was somewhat afraid of him. He guessed that Fan Xian was from a rich family and didn't dare to get too close to him. So he smiled and said, I wouldn't dare charge you. I'm just a bit hungry for the roast chicken you brought. Shi Chanli said helplessly, Master Fan, aren't you looking for someone? You can wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, but by chance you'll find it without any effort. Fan Xian smiled. When he first met Xing Yan on the banks of the Lujing River, he had said these words, but there had been no reaction. But today he used it on these scholars, and sure enough, Ho Jichang and the others immediately understood what he meant. They were very interested and asked, Master Fan, are you looking for us? Fan Xian pointed at the drunk Yang Wanli and said, Master Yang and I are old friends, so I've come to pay a visit. Ho Jichang laughed. I've never heard of Wanli having such a generous friend in the capital. Come, Master Fan, please sit. Here is some wine and roast chicken. I'm glad you don't mind. Shi Chanli had always liked Fan Xian's way of talking, and seeing that he was a friend of a friend, he didn't put on airs and offered his seat. On the other side, Qingjialan had been trying to wake Yang Wanli up, and he couldn't help but smile at Fan Xian. Fan Xian was curious about something else. He cupped his hands and bowed to Ho Jichang. How should I address you, brother? Ho Jichang. Master Ho, why are you so sure that I'm a generous young master? Hearing the name Jichang, Fan Xian couldn't help but want to laugh. I don't think I'm born fat, he said. One look and you can tell that I'm a person who eats his fill and has nothing better to do. Ho Jichang smiled and apologized, saying, Gongzi's clothes are worth a lot of money, how can an ordinary scholar afford to wear it? As for the word generous, it's just that we're used to it. I hope you don't mind. He felt that this young man looked familiar, but his vision was a bit blurry from the alcohol, so he couldn't remember. Not at all, not at all. Fan Xian smiled warmly and sat down at the table. Scholars were free and easy, and they didn't care too much about an uninvited guest. Yang Wanli wouldn't wake up for a while anyway, so other than Qingjialan, who urged Fan Xian to drink a few cups, Ho Jichang and Shi Chanli began to compete with each other as if no one else was present. Before they'd had enough, they began to discuss the Tao again. This was not the mysterious Tao, but the Tao of a country's economy and people's livelihood. Fan Xian picked up a chicken leg and slowly nibbled on it while listening to the two debate. He found that Ho Jichang's way of thinking leaned towards the school of legalism. He placed great emphasis on the law, while Shi Chonli was a sentimental person who placed great emphasis on education. But in the end, the one leaning towards the school of legalism wasn't blindly demanding, and the one who placed great emphasis on education wasn't blindly admonishing. They really were two very clear-eyed scholars. Occasionally, when he talked about the political affairs of the various counties, he would analyze them carefully and not just talk about them in general. He was not like other scholars who always focused on the word world, but he did not know that the word world was much broader than the eyes of the vast majority of people in the world. The more Fan Xian listened, the more pleased he became. Ho Jichang's name was one of the names he'd written down. Seemed that he had a good eye. But this Shi Chonli's temperament was warm and easy. How come he had no impression of him in the exam hall? As he was feeling pleased with himself, he suddenly heard the gentle Shi Chonli slam the table and angrily say, "In the end, it's all that Sir Fan Jr.'s fault." Fan Xian couldn't help but be surprised. Chapter 169. As it turned out, the conversation at the table had shifted from officialdom to literature. Naturally, it was inevitable that they would talk about Sir Fan, who had shocked the world with his poetry last year. Fan Xian pretended to hold the wine cup and sip it, but he was prepared. If this guy dared to say one bad word about him, he would throw the cup of wine in his hand out to relieve his anger. Unexpectedly, Shi Chonli stood up. His face was flushed like a peach blossom and he began to recite mushy words. Tears streamed down his face as he said, "I've been reading the Bangxian's High Poetry Anthology for months. How can I read other people's poems? How can I have the courage to pick up my brush and write again? Although there are a few poems that I find strange with Sir Fan before me, how can I be a little sure?" How sad. Fan Xian beamed, thinking of those lovely people who criticized their leaders for not taking care of their rest. Ho Jichang, however, said disapprovingly, "Poetry is outside the realm. What can it do to govern the country?" Having said this, he turned to Fan Xian, who had been cold all day, and asked for help. "What do you think, Sir Fan?" He couldn't help but look at Fan Xian again. "Oh, it's you." Fan Xian was shocked again. Had he been recognized? The lighting in the exam hall was not very bright. Aside from people like Yang Wanli who dared to look him in the eye and talk to him with his eyes, not many people dared to look at the examiner's face. Ho Jichang's next words came very quickly. "Earlier when I was buying wine, I brushed shoulders with Sir Fan." Fan Xian immediately remembered that this was the scholar who had carried the 2 pots of wine. For some reason, such a small matter made Ho Jichang seem much more friendly toward Fan Xian, and he began to speak enthusiastically. Not only did Fan Xian find it strange, even Shi Chonli was a little confused. Sir Fan and Sir Fan are of the same school. Why don't you tell us what you think of Sir Fan's Bangxian's High Poetry Anthology? I'm just borrowing from others. No matter how thick-skinned Fan Xian was, he couldn't bring himself to praise himself in front of others. Who knew that Shi Chonli would become angry when he heard this? He put down his chopsticks and said, "Is Sir Fan the same as Master Zhuang? I thought highly of Zhuang Mohan's character, but I didn't expect him to be such a muddle-headed scoundrel. Master Fan, if you're less educated, you shouldn't say such ridiculous things." Fan Xian was startled. Only now did he realize that he had long since established an unbreakable position in the hearts of the kingdom of Qing's scholars. He smiled shyly, not knowing what to say. Seeing that Fan Xian was speechless, Shi Chonli became tipsy and jokingly scolded, "You are both young masters of the Fan family. How can there be such a big gap between you?" At this moment, Yang Wanli finally woke up under Qing Jialin's care. The first thing he saw was Fan Xian's beautiful face. He was quite frightened. He quickly stood up and bowed to Fan Xian. "Sir Fan, why are you here?" "Master Fan? Which Master Fan?" The other 3 men at the table were confused. They didn't know why Yang Wanli was so nervous. Yang Wanli smiled bitterly. "This is the person I mentioned earlier, Sir Fan Jr., who let the students into the examination hall. Brother Shi, don't you like Bangxian's high poems the most? Hurry up and pay your respects." Only now did Shi Chonli realize that the person he had just scolded was Fan Xian himself. The intense shock made him jump up from his chair. He didn't know whether to bow to Fan Xian or not. He looked very awkward. Even Ho Ji-chang and Qing Shilin, who were much calmer, had their mouths wide open. They looked at Fan Xian, not knowing what to say. Fan Xian had long since become a first-class figure in the hearts of the world's scholars. Later, he married the Prime Minister's daughter and became a fifth-level scholar at the Imperial College at the age of 17. No matter how one looked at it, he was the object of the scholars' envy. And his Banxian's high poems had long since become popular. The image of the red light floating above the clouds had become one with the name Fan Xian. Fan Xian smiled a little embarrassedly. What? So surprised to see a living person? Ho Ji-chang was the first to wake up. He smiled bitterly. So you are Sir Fan Jr. I apologize for my lack of manners earlier. Sir Chanli's eyes shone. He bowed deeply to Fan Xian and said sincerely, thanks to Brother Yang, I was actually able to meet Sir Fan Jr. today. It is truly a great fortune. Fan Xian shook his head and smiled. The examination is over. I don't want to stay in the manor forever, so I came out for a walk. I knew that Yang Wanli was staying in this inn, so I came to find him. I didn't expect my luck to be so good. Earlier at the table, I listened to your wise words. It was not a wasted trip. The crowd couldn't help but feel ashamed. They thought back to how they had talked in front of this great scholar. Now that they thought about it, it was indeed a little absurd. Even the proud Ho Ji-chang smiled bitterly. It's all Wanli's fault. He was drunk all along. At that moment, Qing Shilin, who had been speaking slowly, finally introduced himself. Sir Fan, my surname is Qing. Qing Shilin. Thinking that he might be able to form a relationship with this popular figure of the court, Qing Shilin, the scholar of Shandong Road, felt inexplicably nervous. He stuttered. Everyone was startled. Soon after, they heard the mistake in his words. They couldn't help but burst into laughter. Qing Shilin's face also reddened. He mumbled, not knowing what to say. Fortunately, his laughter diluted some of the shock in everyone's hearts. Hearing that Sir Fan Jr. had come to find him, Yang Wanli couldn't help but feel a little puzzled and flattered. What orders do you have, Sir Fan Jr.? Fortunately, these people all knew what they were doing, and most of them still had the selfish thought of putting the treasure on their table. So they didn't make a ruckus. The students inside and outside the inn continued to drink and make merry. No one knew that Sir Fan Jr., who was often mentioned, was in the inn at that moment. Otherwise, there would have been a great deal of noise and excitement. Fan Xian had originally just wanted to give Yang Wanli a hint, but he hadn't expected such a situation. Naturally, it wasn't appropriate to talk about it. He smiled and said, no matter what, Brother Yang and I are fated to share a robe. He turned to Sir Chanli and said, Brother Yang and I are fated to share a robe. He then turned to Ho Ji-chang and said, Brother Ho and I are fated to meet, so there are some things I would like to remind you all. As soon as these words came out, even Qing Shilin, who had not been named, became nervous. Ho Ji-chang could no longer maintain his calm expression. Every scholar wanted a good future, and this Sir Fan Jr. was the censor of this year's civil service examination. Now that he had come here without avoiding suspicion, what he had to say was naturally very important. Fan Xian paused and considered his words. The court examinations will be held on the 1st of March. You should all make some preparations. The students were shocked, and their hands, hidden in their sleeves, could not help but tremble. These words seemed ordinary, but the hidden meaning was shocking. Sir Fan Jr. was a popular figure in the court, and behind him was the Prime Minister, Count Sinan. If anyone could know the list of the top 3 ahead of time, Fan Xian certainly had the right to do so. Since he had asked everyone to prepare for the palace examination, that meant they would definitely make the list. Fan Xian put a finger to his lips and made a gesture for silence. He smiled and said, not necessarily. I'm just here to remind you all. Ho Ji-chang said absent-mindedly, Minister Guo has been arrested and imprisoned. The list will certainly change. Fan Xian quietly replied, I don't remember Brother Qing and Brother Shi, but Brother Ho and Brother Yang will definitely make it. Ho and Yang were overjoyed. No longer boasting, they stood up and bowed deeply to Fan Xian. They knew that from now on, the two of them were definitely going to worship this young teacher, unless they did not want to have a broad official career and a prosperous future. Qing Shilin and Sir Chanli were slightly disappointed, but they thought that Sir Fan Jr. just didn't remember clearly, and that there would not be a good result tomorrow. They comforted themselves. It was clear that the inn was no longer a suitable place to talk. Yang Wanli respectfully invited Fan Xian into his room and then served him good tea. After a while he sincerely said, "Sir Fan Jr., I have no money, no power, no mouth and no face. I really do not know how I could gain your favor, and I do not know why you would take the risk to come and tell me this news." The words "no money, no power, no reputation and no reputation" really spoke of the bitterness and powerlessness of those without connections. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. You all know the state of the examination field of Qing. Although the list of the top 3 has not yet come out, it has generally been decided. As for why I have come today, it is because I am afraid that you will give up on yourself. You will not review your studies and you will not respond. If you lose face in the palace, I am afraid that my face will not be good either. You must know that outside the exam hall, many people saw me let you in. I might as well say that I have taken a small risk, but it does not matter. Today the examiners in the capital were all frightened and uneasy, but Fan Xian said it did not matter. The students could not help but be surprised. Now that things had come to this, these clever people naturally understood the meaning of Fan Xian's visit. They looked at each other and Ho Jichong bowed first. "Thank you, teacher." Yang Wanli bowed again. Even Shi Chanli and Qing Shilin were no longer sitting and bowed to Fan Xian. Fan Xian looked at the 4 scholars who were a few years older than him, and he could not help but feel a little strange. He smiled. "I am not the father-in-law of the Prime Minister's manor, and I am not Minister Gua. Besides, I have money and I will have even more money in the future, so you do not need to worry. I only value your talent and virtue. As for after the palace examination, you will enter the court as officials. As long as you are loyal, diligent and work for the benefit of the country, I am sure that I have not misjudged you. Naturally, I will be happy." These words were very gentle, but they were very cold. The 4 were shocked and they agreed sincerely. After chatting for a while, Fan Xian found out that the reason he Zhongwei did not participate in the spring examination was because of the death of an elder in his family. He sighed a few times and then took his leave. After leaving and getting into the carriage, Fan Xian frowned and said to Ting Zijing, "Why am I still not used to doing this?" Wang Qinian appeared in the carriage at the right time and replied softly, "Because deep down, you are still a scholar, not an adult." Chapter 170. After Fan Xian left the Tongfu Tavern, the 4 scholars in the room looked at each other. It seemed that they had never imagined that such a big piece of cake would fall from the sky and fall on their heads. "What do we do now?" Yang Wanli sat on the bed, somewhat stupefied. After Qing Jialin and Shi Chanli congratulated him, they laughed. "From now on, Brother Yang, you have the support of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue. I'm afraid your career will be smooth sailing." Yang Wanli's simple and honest face showed a hint of bitterness. "I have always admired Sir Fan's talent and learning. This spring examination was also thanks to him making an exception. I presume that Sir Fan also put in a lot of effort to mark the papers behind the scenes. I wish that Sir Fan had not made this trip today." Qing and Shi were speechless. They knew that Yang Wanli felt that Fan Xian had done him a favor. Ho Jichong, who had always been the hidden leader of the group, smiled and shook his head. If Sir Fan had done him a favor, he would not have come in person. "Wanli, you worry too much. I have decided that from now on in the court I will think of Sir Fan as my idol. I will make a name for myself." Shi Chanli was stunned. Why had Ho Jichong, who had always prided himself on being virtuous, suddenly changed his temperament? Yang Wanli shook his head and said, "I also know that in every exam teachers and students are the norm. But as you know, Brother Ho, I have always respected Sir Fan Jr.'s talent and learning. Because of the item I carried on my person, and because I like Sir Fan Jr.'s personality, I always hoped that Sir Fan Jr. would be different from these court officials. I've asked for perfection, I've asked for perfection." Qing Jialin scolded him. Although Sir Fan has the talent of poetry, he is still an official of the court and the son of a noble. It is not easy for him to come here in person. "Brother Wanli, do you hope that Sir Fan is a true immortal who does not eat the food of common mortals? Besides, a true immortal is not necessarily better for this impoverished mortal world than a capable official who is good at scheming." Shi Chanli clapped his hands in praise. "Brother Jialin, although you are a man of few words, your words today are very clear." He turned to Yang Wanli and said, "If we are talking about admiration, Wanli, you definitely cannot compare to me. I often hold the Banksian's High Poetry Anthology in my hands and can recite the hundreds of poems inside like the back of my hand. However, seeing Sir Fan Jr. today, I am not at all disappointed. Why? It is all because poetry speaks from the heart. Sir Fan Jr. is indeed a free and easy person of my generation. How can he be compared to those corrupt officials in court? He smiled and continued, when I brought the roast chicken here earlier, there weren't many people holding umbrellas in the alley. I'm a person who likes to play around. Looking at the young man under the umbrella, his face was delicate and pretty, his breath was fresh and pleasant, and his comments were somewhat novel and frightening. Therefore, I recklessly crawled under his umbrella and walked all the way here. If it was any other powerful official, how could they tolerate my rudeness? Sir Fan Jr.'s face was full of smiles. Traveling with me, there was not a trace of unnaturalness in his expression. In the inn I found out that he was Fan Xian. To tell the truth, I was pleasantly surprised. Fan Xian, you really didn't disappoint me. Only now did everyone realize that there had been such a thing. No wonder Fan Xian had said that he and Shi Chanli were fated. Thinking of the feeling, they couldn't help but smile. Yang Wanli scratched his head awkwardly. Maybe. I just feel a sense of nirvanic disillusionment. I've always felt that Sir Fan Jr. should be the kind of person who sits idle on a grape rack, writes thousands of poems, and doesn't care about the filthy matters of the court. Ho Jichang shook his head in disapproval. That kind of person seems elegant and refined, but he's really useless to the country and of no benefit to the people. Sir Fan really was like that, I would actually look down on him. Not necessarily. Yang Wanli sighed. Ho Jichang smiled lightly. I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but how can a scholar serve his country? The only way is to enter the court and become an official. But how can outsiders like you and I understand the mysteries and terrors of the court? So, Sir Fan Jr. came today not because he needs us, but because he knows that we need him. He paused, then continued, although I have some pride, I'm not a pedantic person who doesn't know when to advance or retreat. Since we have this opportunity, of course we must seize it. If we must follow someone in the court, then I think that Sir Fan is the best choice. I think that in the future his achievements in the court will not conflict with our daily ideals. Everyone asked in unison, why? Everyone was a little puzzled by Ho Jichang's resolute attitude. Hearing him emphasize it now, they became even more curious. Ho Jichang picked up his teacup from the table and looked at the remnants of Fan Xian's tea. He was a little lost in thought. After a while he said, a popular person of the court on a rainy day would actually take care that the water on his umbrella wouldn't drip into the pot of a street vendor sheltering from the rain. He would rather get himself wet than lean to the side. Such a considerate and kind person, if he isn't a great villain, then he's a great sage. He smiled. A 17-year-old youth can't hide it so well at any time, so I believe that Sir Fan Jr. is a great sage. My judgment is that simple because I was moved by that scene in the rain. The room was silent. After a long time there was a sigh. The next day, on the red wall to the left of the exam hall, the yellow paper that the examinees had been waiting for was finally pasted. The rules for selecting scholars in the Kingdom of Qing's spring examination were not complicated. After the provincial examination was the general examination, and after the general examination, the top 3 candidates would be chosen. However, there was no ranking and they were arranged according to the strokes on the imperial list. The number of people in the top 3 varied from year to year. Because there had been an additional examination in the 3rd year of the Qing calendar, the number of candidates in the next 2 years was a little low. This year there were only 108 names on the imperial list. Because there were so few candidates, whether it was the students of the Imperial College in the capital or the scholars from various counties who had come to the capital to take the exam, they were all nervous and uneasy. To the west of the examination hall was a bridge. If one wanted to look at the results under the Vermilion Wall, they had to cross the bridge. At this time, the area under the Vermilion Wall was already surrounded by students wearing long gowns. The crowd was moving and they were nervously searching for their names on the big yellow paper. On the other side of the bridge, Ho Jichang and Yang Wanli, who had already taken the medicine to calm their hearts, walked slowly. The bridge was still stained with yesterday's rain, and the moss between the bricks was particularly slippery. The 4 of them walked that way and Qing Jialin almost slipped, which made the crowd laugh. Qing Jialin laughed at himself. Although his and Shi Chanli's steps were as slow as his 2 friends, They couldn't help but be nervous deep down. Coming to the red wall, the four of them squeezed through the crowd with great difficulty. They began to look from the left side, and after who knew how long, they suddenly heard Sir Chanli cry out in joy. Brother Ho, brother Ho! Got it! Got it! The other three heard the sound and hurried to Sir Chanli's side. Sure enough, they saw Ho Ji-chang's name on the third row above their heads. They couldn't help but feel excited. Yang Wanli lightly punched Ho Ji-chang's shoulder, his face full of smiles. Ho Ji-chang smiled slightly, wanting to show a trace of pride, but this was a big deal. Although he considered himself virtuous, thinking of the 10 years of hardship he had suffered, the ardent expectations of his parents at home, and the envious gazes of the scholars around him, he couldn't help but feel a little smug. He couldn't help but open his mouth, revealing an extremely happy smile. At this time, the three golden words Ho Ji-chang on the imperial list seemed to shine in the sunlight, appearing incomparably precious and with a limitless future. The four of them no longer separated and simply looked carefully to the right. After who knew how long, they finally succeeded in finding Yang Wanli's name on the imperial list. Only now did they truly believe what Sir Fan Jr. had said the day before. Yang Wanli saw that his name was indeed on the imperial list, and he was extremely excited. His eyes were a little red and he mumbled to himself, I really got it, I really got it. He suddenly let out a strange cry and rushed out of the crowd. He ran to the side of the bridge and roared at the water below. His voice reverberated through the bridge, making a buzzing sound. The three friends looked at him with smiles, knowing why he was so excited. Yang Wanli lost his mother when he was 8 and grew up alone in Quanzhou. It was all thanks to his father, who endured the cold and hunger to buy him a lot of books and urged him to enter the family school. He endured the supercilious look and studied, and with great difficulty, passed the provincial exams and came to the capital. But after a month in the capital, Yang Wanli discovered that he should have been talented, and that his reasoning was more practical than other scholars. Unfortunately, the He family mountain was far away and the family school was simple and crude. He never learned the flourishing rhetoric of the scholars in the capital, and his essays were always dry and unattractive. So even his close friends Ho Ji-chang and Sir Chanli thought he couldn't get it. Yang Wanli himself didn't have much hope, so he spent the last of his silver to buy the most popular shirt among the students, and put Sir Chanli's essay in it. He wanted to gamble. He didn't expect that before he even entered the examination hall, he would be dragged out by the scholar Fan Xian. At the time, Yang Wanli was devastated. He had thought that his 10 years of hard work had been wasted, and he didn't expect that Sir Fan Jr. would give him a second chance. After the examination, he left the hospital and didn't dare to use the notes in his shirt. Naturally, the essays he wrote were not brilliant, and so he gave up on the idea of writing. He just drank and made merry. Only when he heard that Minister Gua had been imprisoned did he smile a little more. He didn't expect that Sir Fan Jr. would personally come to Tongfu Tavern to see him, and secretly mention that he might enter the top 3. After sorrow came joy, and after despair came hope. This kind of emotional impact continued until today. After Yang Wanli crossed the bridge and stood under the red wall, he increasingly felt that Sir Fan Jr.'s visit yesterday was a dream, and that he couldn't have gotten it. But he really did get it. Yang Wanli looked at his slightly twisted face in the rippling water and calmed down a little. Naturally, he understood why he had been so lucky in a few short days, and he was very grateful to that young man. Chapter 171. None of the scholars noticed Yang Wanli's deranged actions. Even the citizens of the capital who were passing by on the other side of the river did not look over curiously. Because in the capital, this kind of scene was all too common, especially when the results of the spring examinations were released. Near the vermilion wall of the examination hall, there would always be many madmen appearing out of nowhere. At this moment, the scholars on the other side of the bridge all had strange expressions on their faces. Some were excited, some were dejected. Those who had made it looked up to the sky and cried out, while those who had not made it hit the ground with their heads. There were all kinds of expressions, and it was indescribably comical. There were even more miserable scholars who wailed incessantly, hugging the large locust tree next to the vermilion wall and rubbing their faces against it. No matter how hard their companions pulled, they would not let go until their cheeks were bleeding. They looked incomparably wretched. The kingdom of Qin used the imperial examinations to select scholars, and those who were not from high clans could not be granted any imperial examinations. So for ordinary commoner scholars, the release of the results of the spring examinations was the only way they could change their lives. This kind of pressure and motivation was enough to turn a gentle and refined scholar into a deranged madman. Compared to those scholars who were kneeling on the riverbank and praying to the heavens, thanking the heavens for allowing them to make it, Yang Wanli had only shouted twice, and it was indeed rather dull. Of course, this highlighted the steadiness of Ho Jichang and the other two. By the time Yang Wanli had regained his composure and was happily walking back to the Vermilion Wall, his three friends had already carefully examined the entire imperial proclamation. Unexpectedly, Shi Chanli had not made it onto the list. What made everyone disappointed and somewhat happy was that Qing Jialan's name had shockingly appeared in the last row. Qing Jialan's face was full of uncontrollable excitement, but seeing Shi Chanli's slightly disappointed expression, he could not show it too much. He comforted him, "If you don't make it this time, come back next year." This was a very old-fashioned comforting phrase, but under these circumstances, it seemed to be the only old-fashioned thing to say. Shi Chanli laughed bitterly. Looking at the despondent examinees around him who had failed, he forced himself to raise his spirits and smiled. "This time, 3 out of the 4 of us have made it, which is already a great thing. Compared to the previous year's spring examinations, this year's list is much fairer. As for me, I'll have to reconsider." Ho Jichang nodded and gently patted Shi Chanli on the shoulder. He knew that although Shi Chanli was the most carefree of the 4, the blow he had taken today was not small. He changed the subject and smiled. "I don't know how Sir Fan Jr. did it to protect so many people. I see that the rankings are different from previous years. There are more names with real talent, and there are fewer stupid and incompetent people who rely solely on their family background. It must have something to do with the Overwatch Council's investigation of the exam hall fraud." At this moment, the few of them had already walked to a quiet place by the riverbank and sat down. Their voices were still very soft, afraid that they would cause trouble for their fellow disciple Master Xian. Ho Jichang shook his head. Although many officials were arrested this time, other than a few Jiangnan scholars, no other scholars were exposed. From this, it can be seen that before the Overwatch Council acted, Sir Fan Xian had already made arrangements. He shook his head with a bitter smile and sighed. He thought that young Sir Fan really did have a strong background to be able to do something like this during the national ceremony. But it seemed that he had not misjudged Fan Xian. This year's list was much fairer. The 4 of them chatted about the situation in the capital. Over the past 2 days, there had been many officials who had fallen from grace. Everyone in the officialdom was in danger, but Fan Xian looked very confident. At this moment, Shi Chanli, who had been silent all this time, suddenly opened his mouth. "I think that Sir Fan has something to do with the scandal being exposed." The other 3 were shocked. "If that is true, then Sir Fan is even more amazing than we thought." Of course, Fan Xian had something to do with the scandal at the exam hall, but the Overwatch Council had acted appropriately. Although Gui Yu, the director of the Board of Rights, had fallen, the Eastern Palace had not suffered too much damage. So for the time being, the Crown Prince was only suspicious of Fan Xian. And in this list, the Eastern Palace still had 3 people they needed. Compared to the Great Prince and the Bureau of Military Affairs, this was a very good result. Fan Xian sat in his study, looking at the list that Wang Qinian had copied out. He frowned slightly. The capital had not been peaceful for the past 2 days. The chief official Gui Yu, a teacher, and a supervisor had all been invited to tea by the Overwatch Council. As for Fan Xian, as the examiner of the spring examination, he had been in charge of the crucial step of sealing the names, yet nothing had happened. It was inevitable that some people would begin to speculate. But he was also somewhat happy. Of the students he favored, aside from Shi Chanli, who had a personality that he liked the most had successfully entered the list. As for the results of the court examinations, that would depend on their luck. There was really nothing he could do to help. As he left the study, he saw a green silhouette walking toward him. Fan Xian let out a cry and prepared to hide in his room. He cried bitterly in his heart. Who would have thought that his father would come to his courtyard today? Count Sinan Fanjian was now the official minister of revenue, but his stern face had not changed much. He coldly pushed open the door to his son's room, which had not been closed in time. He stepped in and sternly shouted, "You went out again yesterday?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly and bowed. "Father, it was raining in the capital last night, so I wanted to go for a walk." "How many people did you think you could hide your visit to Tongfu Tavern?" Fan Jian sat down. Lin Wanner, who was in a side room, heard the noise and rushed over. She hurriedly called for a maid to bring her master tea. Fan Jian looked at his daughter-in-law warmly and smiled. He waved his hand, indicating that she should go back to her room to rest. His expression was as cold as ice. "The matters of the exam hall are complicated. You rashly did that, so be it. I asked you to stay in the mansion to avoid this storm. Yesterday you went to the Tongfu Tavern to see those students. Today, when the imperial proclamation comes out, everyone can see clearly that those students are on the proclamation. How will the world see you?" Fan Xian smiled. "Although I am young, I am still a teacher. It is normal for me to go and see the examinees. As for the list, everyone knows what is going on. Why should I care? But recently, the Overwatch Council has been investigating a case of cheating, and the cause of this matter is the slip of paper you passed to them." Fan Jian coldly said, "Enji, if you are truly working for the country, then you should not have placed your own people in the top 3. If you only wanted to use the spring examinations to cultivate your own power, then you should not have turned against Guiyu and pulled him down." Count Sinon looked at his young son in front of him. After a long while he sighed. "No matter where you are, you have your own set of rules. The officialdom of the capital is even more so. Among officials there are honest officials and corrupt officials. Among officials there are slanderous officials and honest officials. These are 2 distinct paths. If you want to be an honest official, then do not walk the path of slanderous officials." Hearing his father call him by his courtesy name, Fan Xian knew that the old man was indeed angry. He gently replied, "I do not want to be an honest official, nor do I want to be a slanderous official. I want to be a powerful official." As soon as he said this, the air in the study suddenly became so cold that it seemed to freeze. After a long while, Fan Jian softly said, "A powerful official? What kind of official can be called a powerful official?" He shook his head and a strange smile appeared on his face. "The Prime Minister has power, I have power, and Qin Pingping has power. But do you think that just because you're a subject you can be called a powerful subject?" Fan Xian calmly replied, "I cannot, because the power lies in the hands of His Majesty." "Then what kind of powerful official do you want to be?" "With power in my hands, there is nothing to worry about," Fan Xian replied sincerely. "I want to be a powerful official that even the emperor's family cannot decide whether I live or die. Because I have the power to protect myself but not others. So I need power." Fan Jian looked at his son and there was a trace of worry in his eyes. Fan Xian smiled helplessly. The reason he had chosen this unusually dangerous and boring path was naturally because of the thick darkness in the depths of his heart. After a long while, a cold light shone in Fan Jian's eyes. "In the future, do not make trouble like this. Qin Pingping can protect you for a while, but he cannot protect you forever. So I warn you, do not get too close to the Overwatch Council." Fan Xian lowered his head. "I know, so I need you to remind me from time to time." He knew that his father had always been afraid of him taking over the Overwatch Council, but Fan Xian refused to give up. Fan Jian slowly closed his eyes. "This time you handled the matter very poorly. Even if Guo Baoquan spoke up in the palace and let you guess that the Guo family was actually working for the eldest princess, you shouldn't have done it yourself. If you had told me beforehand, with the power of the Prime Minister and I, we could have used the exam hall's fraud case to get rid of him, and we wouldn't be in this predicament." Fan Xian knew that what his father said was right. If he had taken the risk and joined forces with the Overwatch Council to deal with Minister Guo, it would only have led to an open ending. No one knew what would happen next and the council would have the initiative. He thought for a moment. "Actually, this time I just wanted to do something that I wanted to do." Perhaps this was just a cheap sense of justice that many people disdained, but Fan Xian still retained a little of it. At present he was only worried about what Qin Pingping had planned. As if he had guessed what his son was thinking, Fan Jian opened his eyes. There was a trace of comfort and worry in his gaze. "You can give up on your fantasies. Qin Pingping will certainly let everyone know that this scandal was single-handedly brought to light by the son of the Fan family." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He knew that his father was right. Qin Pingping was not afraid of the crown prince of the Eastern Palace. As long as he could establish his reputation, as long as he could get closer to controlling the Overwatch Council, he would do anything. Before leaving his son's study, Count Sinon said lightly, "In the future you need to be more mature. You can keep the childish declarations of powerful officials to yourself. There's no need to tell me." Chapter 172. One day at the end of February, a rumor suddenly began to circulate among the officialdom of the capital. The reason why the spring examination fraud case had been so quickly and accurately solved was all because the Overwatch Council had a list of students who had bribed the examinees. And this list had been provided to the Overwatch Council by Master Fan Jr., who was known as the Immortal Poet. It was said that Sir Fan Xian deeply detested the accumulated abuses in the imperial examinations. He was abnormally angry that the diligent scholars of the world could not obtain a fair promotion after 10 years of hard work. That was why he ignored the layers of traps in the officialdom and bravely wrote a memorial to the emperor. He did not hesitate to sell himself to corrupt officials in the court in order to obtain that important list. In short, the rumor was bizarre. It was said that Fan Xian was a man of great wisdom and courage. That list was clearly not a secret, but it was said to be the most sinister piece of paper in Qing officialdom. Fan Xian could tell at a glance that this was the work of those from the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. As soon as this rumor spread, Fan Xian immediately became a thorn in the side of the officials of the Board of Rights, a thorn in the flesh. But on the other hand, his reputation in the eyes of the common people and the scholars of the world took another step forward. Although the Imperial College and the Tunguen Pavilion maintained their silence, Fan Xian had now become the spiritual leader of the scholars. Fan Xian straightened his collar and sleeves. "Isn't this leader a little too new?" He then gently patted his sister's worried face. "What are you worried about? My brother is one of the most powerful princes in Qing." His voice was very soft and his words were very strange. But Fan Ruoruo still understood, even though she did not understand the deeper meaning hidden within. Lin Wanner did not hear. Even if she had, she probably would not have understood. In any case, she was not as worried as her sister-in-law. Smiling, she tied the jade rui that the Empress had given her to her husband's belt. Pretending to dust it, she said, "Come back soon." It was as Count Sinon had said. Fan Xian was too immature and had left behind too many problems. Once the rumor spread, Jingdo was shocked. Everyone's gaze fell on Fan Xian. Although the people behind the officials who had fallen from power because of the corruption case were wary of Fan Xian's background, they still began to move. That morning, a young censor from the Imperial Censorate had already sent a letter to the palace, accusing Fan Xian of fraud and immoral conduct. Fan Xian had left to go to the Ministry of Justice to be tried. Originally, the cheating case had been investigated by the Overwatch Council, but the officials who had suffered greatly from the scandal were not willing to let the Overwatch Council deal with Fan Xian, so they used the Ministry of Justice's route. The Ministry of Justice had never been on good terms with the Prime Minister, nor did they have any friendship with Fan Xian. The Ministry of Justice had never been on good terms with the Prime Minister, nor did they have any relationship with Fan. Fan Xian looked at the serving girl whom he hadn't seen much in recent days and laughed. "When I was little, I told you that the words go well were not very auspicious." Cece pursed her lips and smiled. "Then I hope the young master will leave early and return early." "All right. Cook a bowl of millet porridge for the young master to drink. Put in some sweet millet from Danzhou. I haven't tasted your cooking in a long time." Fan Xian suddenly turned his head and asked, "How are the things I asked you to copy?" These days, Fan Xian didn't know how to deal with Cece, who had grown up with him. He also didn't want her to continue being a servant girl in the Fan manner, so he arranged for her to go to the study to help him copy books. Cece had rarely spoken to her young master these days, and her heart was naturally uneasy. Hearing her young master's question, she cheerfully said, "I'm almost done copying." "'S good." Fan Xian nodded and walked out. He smiled at his wife and sister. "Look, the servant girl I brought up is different. She's even calmer than you, Roro." Fan Ruoruo whispered worriedly, "That's because Cece doesn't know how serious today's matter is." It was indeed serious. Fan Xian had offended too many people by exposing the corruption case. Seeing how the court officials were willing to go against the Prime Minister and Count Sinon in order to bring him to the Ministry of Justice, It was obvious how serious the matter was. Exiting the main gate of Fan Manor, the usually quiet street in the south of the city seemed very crowded today. The officials from the Ministry of Justice who had come to arrest him had a worried expression on their faces. They hid behind the stone lions like thieves. At the main gate, Fan Seja was leading a group of guards and servants from Fan Manor, beating up the officials with long brooms in their hands. On the street, many scholars and commoners who had heard that Fan Xian was going to be put on trial had swarmed in. They already knew that Fan Xian had something to do with the scandal that had shaken the capital's officialdom. The commoners' simple minds didn't care about what was behind the scandal. They only knew that Fan Xian was talented, kind, and a good man. But a good man was going to be put on trial today, so they all felt wronged on Fan Xian's behalf. Fan Xian stood at the gate and smiled as he looked at the crowd outside the manor. He saw that most of them were young scholars, and he knew that Qin Pingping's trick had worked. He whispered to Ting Zijing, who was beside him. "Where are Shi Chanli and the other three now?" According to the young master's orders, they are currently being secretly protected by the Overwatch Council. Sir Wang Qinian suggested that the four should be sent to King Jing's manor, lest the court officials use this matter to frame you. But I believe that the young master doesn't want to have anything to do with Crown Prince Jing, so I declined, Ting Zijing replied in a low voice. Fan Xian looked at Ting Zijing with some surprise. He hadn't expected the man to guess the situation he least wanted to see. If he sent the four scholars to King Jing's manor, it seemed safe, but in the eyes of the Eastern Palace, exposing the scandal would no longer be purely out of a sense of justice and His Majesty's edict. Instead, it would be to stand on the side of the second prince and attack the crown prince. If that happened, the relationship between him and the Eastern Palace would be irreconcilable. Seeing Fan Xian walk out of the manor gate, the surrounding scholars burst into cheers. They all surged forward and shouted something. It was nothing more than to express their admiration and support for Sir Fan Jr.'s righteous shoulders. Fan Xian smiled like a star from his previous life and waved his hand. He said quietly to Ting Zijing, "The biggest problem with scholars is that they are too simple." Ting Zijing smiled and didn't say anything. Fan Xian suddenly laughed happily. "If there's a chance in the future, do you want to leave the capital and become an official? With the power of your family, it's not a problem to make sure you become a 6th or 7th level parent." Ting Zijing was surprised. Although he had been educated, he had always been a guard. Why did the young master want to become an official? But then he remembered that the young master might need someone he could trust in the provinces of the kingdom of Qing. After a pause, he replied, "It's all up to you, young master." "Up to me?" Fan Xian laughed. "It's a pity that the kingdom of Qing doesn't have Bailing County." Fan Xian's face had always been clear and beautiful. Now that he was laughing heartily, it was even more radiant, like a spring breeze. The scholars who had come to support him felt very gratified. The immortal poet Fan Xian should look like this. He rubbed Fan Seja's head and told his brother not to cause trouble. Only then did he politely bid farewell to the officials of the Ministry of Justice, get into his own carriage and head for the Ministry of Justice. The crowd gradually dispersed, and the scholars who were rushing to take the exam also chased after the yamen of the Ministry of Justice. No one noticed that Fan Manor's valiant guards were escorting another carriage out of the southern street of the city, heading in the direction of the royal palace. Lin Wan sat in the carriage. Last night she and Fan Xian had discussed this in bed. Today she had to go to the palace to explain things to the Eastern Palace and the other palaces. Elsewhere, Fan Xian was alone. He walked into the main hall of the Ministry of Justice. The hall was a little gloomy. The wind whistled in and the early spring weather made him feel a little cold. But he still smiled and cupped his hands in salute to the three people sitting high above. "Greetings, sir." The spring examination fraud case was a big deal and Fan Xian was a key figure in it. So other than the Minister of Justice, there were also two high-ranking officials from the Supreme Court and the Imperial Censorate. On both sides of the hall, there was a row of officials from the 13 yamens. It was a frightening sight. Fan Xian frowned, realizing that the other party had not replied. After a while he suddenly heard a shout. The Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, asked coldly, "Is the person standing in the hall the 5th-level Imperial scholar Fan Xian of the Imperial College?" Fan Xian was no longer the young calf who had just entered Jingdo with a smile on his face in the Jingdo government. He glanced at the minister and lightly said, "That is me. I called you here today to inquire about the spring examination." Fan Xian smiled and said, "As far as I know, the spring examination fraud case was handled by the Overwatch Council by imperial edict. I didn't know the Ministry of Justice was involved." Hearing this rude reply, the three officials sitting high above were furious. But they knew that the man in front of them was at the height of his popularity. He had the Prime Minister and a minister behind him. After the fraud case, he had gained the respect of the scholars, so they couldn't do anything to him. The Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, had always prided himself on being sober and honest. He couldn't stand such arrogance. He snorted and said, "I am handling this case under imperial edict. Don't make excuses." Fan Xian shook his head. "I'm not making excuses. I just don't know why you have summoned me here. If you are asking about the details of the spring examination fraud case, I am sorry. The Overwatch Council has strict orders that before the case is closed, I am not allowed to reveal it." The Minister of Justice was so angry that he laughed. "Are you not going to answer the court's questions? The Overwatch Council is a part of the court, and the Ministry of Justice is a part of the court." Fan Xian sighed. "As you know, this matter involves too many people. I really don't know how to handle it. The laws of Qing do not make it clear." Chapter 173. As soon as he opened his mouth, he was met with a soft rebuff. The three ministers felt that they could not ask any more questions. They looked at each other and saw the anger in each other's hearts. This time, Fan Xian had unceremoniously overthrown Guiyu, the director of the Board of Rights, and had angered many officials. Fortunately, most of the officials did not dare do anything for the sake of the Prime Minister and Minister Fan. However, these three lords each had their own backgrounds and plans behind them. After a long time, the Minister of Justice, Han Jiwei, suddenly asked in a cold voice, "Yesterday the Imperial Censor reported you. Does Fan Fengjing know about it?" "I know about it but not the details," replied Fan Xian calmly. Han Jiwei stared into his eyes and said, "Fan Xian, don't rely on your talent and background to be so arrogant. And don't think that I will believe that you are truly doing this for the sake of the country and the people by exposing this scandal. If you do not explain clearly what you did during the spring examination, don't blame me for being rude to you." Fan Xian frowned. "There is something wrong with your words, sir. If I did something during the spring examination, would I be willing to take the risk of reporting this to the court? As for the word filthy, I would like to return it to you." "How dare you?" The three officials rebuked him in unison. In all their years in the capital, they had never seen such an arrogant junior. Han Jiwei was so angry that his beard trembled. "Don't think that all the officials in the capital are afraid of your background. You must know that the reason I was able to rule the Ministry of Justice for 8 years was because of my righteousness, not because of your intimidation tactics." Fan Xian laughed and said, "When investigating a case, we care about the evidence. Who would be as impassioned as you, sir, in expressing your opinions? I truly do not understand." Han Jiwei was so angry that he laughed. Fine. Then let me ask you. On February 16th, did you go to Tongfu Tavern?" Fan Xian knew that he was asking about that rainy day. "Yes," he replied with a smile. "Did you go to see Yang Wanli and the others?" "Yes." "Before Yang Wanli entered the palace for the spring examination, did you whisper something to him?" "Yes." "As the examiner of this spring examination, you have the heavy responsibility of supervising the examination. Well, let me ask you directly. Did Yang Wanli enter the top 3? "Exactly. On that day outside the examination hall, there were many witnesses who could prove that you had already found out that Yang Wanli had smuggled drugs into his clothes. Why did you let him into the examination hall?" Fan Xian smiled in his heart. He had long told Wang Qinian to have Yang Wanli destroy the silk robe, so he would not be worried at all. He said, "There is no such thing." But Han Jiwei asked angrily. "Exactly." Good. Then let me ask you, that day outside the examination hall when so many examinees were found to have cheated, did you still let them in?" Fan Xian shivered slightly. He knew that this matter could not even be considered a small matter, but if the other party really did not let it go, it would indeed be troublesome. However, he still calmly replied, "Yes." "All right." Han Jiwei's slightly dark and thin face flashed with some kind of light. He stared into Fan Xian's eyes and said in a cold voice, "Since you've already admitted it, then I can only put you in prison for further investigation." "What did I admit?" asked Fan Xian. Han Jiwei frowned and said coldly, "What I asked you, you admitted it all. This matter is obvious." Fifth-level official Fan Xian, as the minister of the Spring Breeze residence, secretly colluded with examinees Yang Wanli and others to practice favoritism. He regarded the law as nothing and the emperor's grace as nothing. He is truly audacious. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes at the minister and explained, "When did I admit it? Correct, I did see Yang Wanli on February 16th. That was because I admired his talent and learning. At that time the fraud case broke out. If I really did have the suspicion of favoritism, why would I meet with him on that day? Furthermore, the place of the meeting was at Tongfu Tavern, where all the scholars were gathered. Did I not fear gossip?" He smiled and said, "Since I dared to go, although I do not dare to say that this proves that my heart is pure and clear, how can you conclude that I am colluding with Yang Wanli? As you know, the first time I met with Yang Wanli was outside the examination hall. If you say that I colluded with him beforehand, that would be an injustice. Then how do you explain allowing students to enter the examination hall without permission?" Fan Xian frowned slightly, thinking that too many people had seen, and it was all his fault for not taking the civil examinations seriously. That was why he had acted so arrogantly. He shook his head helplessly. "Because I was entrusted by the Overwatch Council to secretly keep an eye on those corrupt officials in the exam hall, so it was not good to lose the big picture because of a little. As for the details, you can send a letter to the Overwatch Council and have them explain in detail." Han Jiwei snorted angrily. The Overwatch Council was His Majesty's secret service. How could he ask? The more he looked at Fan Xian's pretty face, the angrier he became. He pushed the lot pot away and shouted, "Fine, fine, fine. You don't want to admit it. Men, beat this shameless bastard." "Don't beat him." Two people in the court said the same thing at the same time. One of them was the junior minister of the Supreme Court. He smiled bitterly as he tried to persuade the Minister of Justice. The young man in front of him was not an ordinary son of a rich and powerful family. He could not be beaten. The nobles behind him only hoped to teach him a lesson and punish him for his crimes. How could they dare to beat him? After Minister Han calmed down a little, he remembered that Fan Xian was not only the son-in-law of the Prime Minister, but also the son of the minister. He was a civil official that His Majesty greatly admired. Furthermore, Han Jiwei was in the territory of the Six Ministries. How could he not know Lin Wanner's identity? After being reminded by his two colleagues, Han Jiwei could not help but frown. If he really beat Fan Xian up, he would not be able to explain himself to the other nobles in the palace. Then the three of them became curious. Who was the other person who said he could not beat him? The three of them looked down the hall and found Fan Xian looking at them innocently. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court was a little amused. He could not help but ask, "Why not?" Fan Xian explained sincerely, "I am a scholar. According to the laws of Qing, I do not need to kneel. When questioning someone, torture is not allowed. Therefore I said I could not beat him. Otherwise, if the censor came tomorrow and accused Minister Han of not following the laws of Qing, wouldn't that be my fault?" The imperial censor of the imperial censorate, Guo Zheng, was actually a distant relative of Guiyu. He was the leader of the group that had submitted the memorial to Fan Xian. Hearing the barbs in Fan Xian's words, he couldn't help but laugh coldly. "Master Fan, you are not only talented, but you are also very familiar with the laws of the Qing kingdom. But do you know that in the first edict of the Qing kingdom, there are 15 major crimes for which the rules you mentioned earlier can be ignored?" Of course, this censor would not actually dare to use torture on Fan Xian, but he was willing to threaten him with words and vent the frustrations of the officials in the capital these days. Fan Xian shook his head, his face still full of innocence. "I still cannot beat him." The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court was the one who had the least involvement in the exam hall scandal. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "This is a serious crime and Sir Fan Jr. is not willing to defend himself. Why can't he be beaten in court?" Fan Xian still played the trick of using the Overwatch Council. "This involves the secrets of the council," he replied sincerely. "I have not received permission from the relevant officials of the Overwatch Council, so I do not dare to discuss it in detail." The three judges looked at each other and saw the fear and anger in each other's eyes. They could not beat him, so how could they make Fan Xian admit to his wrongdoings? Their respective masters were determined to make Fan Xian suffer. There was no reason for them to let him go back to their manners. At that moment, an advisor suddenly ran in through the side curtain with a nervous expression on his face. He leaned over to Han Jiwei, the Minister of Justice, and said something to him. Han Jiwei's expression immediately changed. A cold light shone in his eyes, but there was also a faint trace of fear. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked up. The tyrannical Zhenqi in his body had long been activated, but he only heard a few words in Han Jiwei's reply. He faintly heard the words Eastern Palace and ruthless. He did not know who had sent the news, nor did he know what had caused this Minister of Justice to be so uneasy. At the same time, another 2 slips of paper were passed into the hands of the imperial censor, Guozheng, and the junior official of the Supreme Court. Guozheng expressionlessly glanced at the slips of paper, but the junior official of the Supreme Court revealed a shocked expression. After thinking for a moment, he actually stood up and cupped his hands in salute to the 2 sirs beside him, saying, "People have 3 urgent needs. Sirs, please interrogate them first, I will be back soon." Fan Xian's heart trembled. What kind of slips of paper could make this vice minister of the Supreme Court want to run away? Before coming to the Ministry of Justice, Fan Xian had already investigated. The Minister of Justice seemed to be fair and honest, but he was actually a member of the Eastern Palace. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court had a good relationship with the Qin family of the Bureau of Military Affairs. As for the censor, Guozheng, when he was young, had an unclear relationship with the eldest princess. If Fan Xian did not have the terrifying power of the Overwatch Council, he would not have known about this relationship, which had been hidden for many years. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard a shout in the hall. "Guards! Fan Xian, the Imperial College's official, is roaring in court. This is a case of fraud and he has committed 15 major crimes. Beat him." Han Jiwei's facial muscles twisted as if he had made a great decision. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court had long since slipped away. It seemed that he knew that a dangerous situation was about to occur in the hall of the Ministry of Justice, and his master did not want to offend the Fan family and the Prime Minister. Fan Xian's eyes were cold. He stared into Han Jiwei's eyes and said coldly, "Do you want to confess under torture?" The censor, Guozheng, also had a fierce look in his eyes. He shouted, "Beat him." 2 fire sticks were aimed at Fan Xian's weakest shins. The 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice were used to this kind of thing. There was no wind when the fire sticks struck, but they were still fierce. Fan Xian's face was frosty and he did not move or evade. There were 2 cracking sounds and the trousers on his legs broke into pieces. It was not his shins that had been broken, but the fire sticks had been broken in the middle, revealing a dense wooden stubble. Chapter 174. Fan Xian took a deep breath and let the tyrannical Zhenqi in his body slowly circulate. His clothes fluttered, and the rui ornament that the Empress had given him swayed at his waist. He looked coldly at the bailiffs of the 13 yamens who were closing in on him. He knew that today's events had deviated greatly from his plan. Since they dared to not give face to the Prime Minister and his father, and had actually used sticks to beat people, it must not have been as simple as torture. He took 2 steps forward and kicked away the 2 pieces of the stick. He looked coldly at the 2 officials in the hall, who were forcing themselves to remain calm. He knew that he had made a grave mistake. He had forgotten about that crazy woman in the distant fief of Xinjiang. But he didn't know whether Han Jiwei was involved because the crown prince was angry at his actions, or because the empress knew something terrible. The Nyolan Street murder had happened a long time ago. In the eyes of the people of the capital, Fan Xian was a civil official with astonishing talent for poetry. They seemed to have forgotten that he was also a martial master. Everyone was shocked. They heard the sound of swords being unsheathed. Countless swords were pointed at Fan Xian, who was standing proudly in the hall. The sticks used by the 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice were specially made. An ordinary 7th-level master would only be able to howl in pain. But who knew that the tyrannical Zhenqi in Fan Xian's body was so fierce that he did not dodge or evade the blows. Instead, he took the blows head-on and broke them in half. This scene frightened all the bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice. Only now did they remember that this seemingly weak and beautiful civil official had once cut open the stomach of Qing Jushu, an 8th-level master of Northern Qi. Dozens of swords had already been unsheathed. In the cold hall of the Ministry of Justice, they gave off a cold light and surrounded Fan Xian. Fan Xian took 2 steps forward and the dozen swords also took 2 steps back in fear. Fan Xian frowned at Han Jiwei and Gu Zheng. "Have you considered the consequences of your reckless actions?" he asked quietly. Han Jiwei and Gu Zheng felt a chill in their hearts. Although this beautiful young man's words were indifferent, they were incomparably sinister. Although Prime Minister Lin Ruofu's influence in the court had been greatly reduced because of Wu Bowen, he was still the head of all the officials in the Kingdom of Qing. There was also the Minister of Revenue who had grown up with the Emperor. Han Jiwei suddenly felt some regret. He should not have followed the orders of that noble. Because Gu Zheng was angry at Gu Yu's downfall, and because he had the support of the eldest princess, he knew that since the matter had already begun, it naturally couldn't end peacefully. Gritting his teeth, he shouted, "This official is here to investigate the case. What consequences can there be?" Han Jiwei thought that now that things had come to this, there was no room for regret. He steeled his heart and said coldly, "Correct, Sir Fan Jr. If you are willing to admit to your involvement in the spring exam fraud case, naturally there will be no need to use torture. If you are unwilling to admit, according to Qing law we can use torture." Fan Xian pursed his thin lips and looked at him with a faint smile. 15 great crimes, 15 great crimes. He shook his head and sighed. "If there is a chance in the future I will have to change the laws of Qing." "Who can change the law?" "Only the emperor, of course." Fortunately, his words were spoken very quietly. Otherwise, if they fell into the ears of bystanders, these words alone would be enough to execute the entire Fan family. Han Jiwei frowned. "Take this criminal official down." As soon as he said this, the officers of the 13 yamens had already surrounded him, swords in hand. There was a whirlwind of blades and 2 of them were already at Fan Xian's neck, forcing him to submit. Fan Xian snorted coldly. His hands, which had been hidden in his sleeves this entire time, suddenly shot out. They softly and quickly spread out, transforming into 2 streaks of smoke that struck the wrists of the 2 bailiffs who were close to him. Immediately after, he quickly pulled back his fists and lightly pushed them on their chests. This series of actions was too fast, so fast that no one could see them clearly. After a moment there were 2 snapping sounds, followed by 2 muffled grunts of pain. The snapping sounds came from the officers' wrists being broken. The snapping sounds came from the 2 swords that had been sent flying by the Jinqi. They slanted upwards and stuck deep into the 2 corners of the Ministry of Justice's board. The 2 swords were stuck above the red sun, as if the sun had sprouted 2 horns of a demon. And the 2 officers were gently pushed in the chest by Fan Xian, and their entire bodies flew backwards. They fell onto 2 chairs, smashing them into pieces and letting out 2 muffled grunts. Everyone was shocked. They hadn't expected Fan Xian's strength to be this strong. They unconsciously took half a step back. Gu Zheng was not in a hurry. He smiled at Fan Xian and said quietly, "Beating an officer in public is an additional crime." Han Jiwei understood what he meant. Whether or not they could use torture was a small matter. As long as they could pin the crime on Fan Xian, it would be fine. The more Fan Xian refused to surrender and the more he resisted, the better. Gu Zheng looked at Fan Xian and smiled. "Young Master Fan, it would be best if you behaved. I know you are skilled in both the pen and the sword, and that it would not be difficult for you to escape from the Ministry of Justice. But do you want to be accused of rebellion and disobedience?" His fingers gently tapped on the chopping board. He was very satisfied with the current situation. He said quietly, "Young Master Fan, if you resist now, it will mean that you have evil intentions. If you do not resist, then be a good boy and accept your punishment." He added at the end, "If young Master Fan wishes to kill his way out of the Ministry of Justice, please do as you please. But it is a pity. A dignified immortal of poetry, the idol of the scholars, is going to cause unrest in the government and ruin his reputation because of such a serious crime." Fan Xian looked at him calmly and suddenly said, "Actually, I grew up scared." He was talking about his experience of looking at corpses every day when he was a child. He thought of what Censor Gua had just said, and it really did have some of Stephen Chow's elegance as a 9th-level official. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He knew that he could not kill his way out of the Ministry of Justice, But he did not want to be punished either. So he could only drag it out until the people behind him reacted. He said coldly, "Killing my way out of the Ministry of Justice is a serious crime. Very well, I will stay here and chat with you too." Having said this, he went to the side and sat down on a chair. His eyelids were slightly closed. He said quietly, "If you want to use torture, I will naturally resist. If you do not use torture, I do not mind sitting here a little longer. My two lords, when you are done with the trial, please let me know so I can go home and have some porridge." What a bold and arrogant person. Han Jiwei shouted, "Arrest him." This was the third time he had shouted during the trial that day. Fan Xian's face was expressionless. He lightly slapped the tea table next to him, and the tyrannical Zhenqi in his palms spread out like a cloud. In an instant, the wooden tea table was smashed into countless pieces. Then he raised his eyes to look at the bailiffs around him. Being swept by his gentle gaze, they thought of the terrifying power this young Sir Fan had demonstrated. None of the bailiffs of the 13 yamens, who were usually not afraid of ghosts or gods, dared to take a step forward. Since the founding of the country, there had never been such an absurd scene in the hall of the Ministry of Justice. It did not seem like something that could happen in real life. It was more like a play that Fan Xian had occasionally seen in his previous life. The criminal being interrogated sat calmly on the chair, and the bailiffs around him did not dare approach. Yet the criminal refused to kill his way out of the Ministry of Justice, and there was nothing they could do about it. In Fan Xian's life, the chair he sat on would always, at the right moment, show his attitude. Perhaps it was anger, or perhaps he was ready to fight back. When he was in Danzhou when he was 12 years old, he had stepped on a small stool and beaten the second housekeeper to a pulp. On the day he had first entered the capital, he had sat on the chair under the side door, suppressing his anger and preparing to receive the second aunt's gentle words. Today, in the hall of the Ministry of Justice, he was still sitting on the chair, his face calm as he looked at the two high-ranking officials who wanted to use sticks to discipline him. In his heart he wondered who else was behind this, other than the eldest princess. The Ministry of Justice once again fell into a stalemate. Seeing Fan Xian surrounded by the 13 yamens, Imperial Censor Guo was in no hurry. He knew that Minister Fan Jian and Prime Minister Lin Ruofu had been delayed by other matters today. He had plenty of time to wait for Yang Wanli and the others to come in as witnesses. He smiled. "Tomorrow I will report what happened today to His Majesty. Let's see if you can still rely on your father's power to be so arrogant. Don't think that I can't convict you." In a moment, when Yang Wanli and the others arrive as witnesses, Minister Han will still arrest you. If you still dare to resist, don't blame the 3 ministers for requesting an edict to punish you for the crime of treason. Fan Xian said quietly, "Sir Guo, since both sides have shed all pretense of cordiality today, I will say this plainly. If Yang Wanli and the others have any problems, you should prepare for your funeral." This was a naked threat. Since the founding of the Kingdom of Qing, Fan Xian was the first person who had dared to threaten a minister of the court and an imperial censor in the hall of the Ministry of Justice with his status as a 5th-level official. Sensing the murderous intent in Fan Xian's light words, Han Jiwei felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. The corner of his eye twitched and he said coldly, "Fan Xian, you must know that you are an official of the court, not a powerful swordsman. Today you have caused a ruckus in the Ministry of Justice. I want to see how you will deal with this." Fan Xian said quietly, "The Ministry of Justice wants to force a confession out of you. The imperial censor is angry that Minister Guo has been removed from his position and wants revenge. I don't know what kind of official you are. Tomorrow I will write a great poem about what happened today and spread it throughout the world. This will teach the people of the Kingdom of Qing today and what the officials are like. It will also teach His Majesty to see who these officials listen to in today's court." Say what you will. Guojing knew that with Fan Xian's current reputation, it was not impossible for him to pull this off. He said quietly, "Sir Fan, if you know the details of the scandal, why did you not report it to your superiors and have the court investigate it? Instead you acted through the Overwatch Council. In any case, you have committed the crime of looking down on the court. I want to see how Minister Fan explains this to the court tomorrow." His words were overbearing and a murderous look flashed across Fan Xian's handsome face. He stood up and stared coldly at the 2 high-ranking officials on the stage. The officials around him grew nervous, and they pointed their sharp blades at Fan Xian's vital points. Just as danger was about to erupt, Yen Ruohai's cold voice came from outside the Ministry of Justice. The Overwatch Council is acting on orders. Since when do we need to explain everything to the Imperial Censor? Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. It was a pity that the people from the council had arrived a little early. Chapter 175. After a series of hurried but orderly footsteps, Yen Ruohai, the head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, walked in from outside the Ministry of Justice. Behind him was a large group of secret agents of the Overwatch Council. Seeing the Overwatch Council put on such a show, Guizheng did not say anything. He only frowned and said, "I didn't think Master Yen would come to hear the case." Yen Ruohai paid no attention to the Imperial Censor. He looked at the beautiful young man on the chair and smiled. "I am Yen Ruohai. Greetings, Master Fan." Fan Xian also stood up and smiled. "If Master Yen still doesn't come, I'll have no choice but to tear down the Ministry of Justice and flee the world." Naturally, this was just a joke. Han Jiwei glanced at Yen Ruohai and furrowed his brows. He wondered why the Overwatch Council had come to mess things up. He said, "Sir Fan Jr. made a ruckus in court and beat up an official. His crime is unpardonable. No matter who comes, I'm afraid he won't be able to leave the Ministry of Justice today. Besides, the headquarters has already sent a notice to arrest Yang Wanli and the other criminals. Once the witnesses arrive, the case will naturally be cleared up." "No need," Yen Ruohai said. "The officials of the 13 Yamens went to the Tongfu Tavern to arrest someone, but they have already been arrested by Sir Mu Tai of the 1st Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They are now drinking tea in the Overwatch Council. If you have time, please go and bring your subordinates back." The Ministry of Justice's reputation had been completely lost today. Han Jiwei pointed at Yen Ruohai's nose and scolded, "Since when did the Overwatch Council have the right to interfere with the affairs of the Ministry of Justice? What right do you have to stop the Ministry of Justice from arresting someone? The spring examination fraud case is handled by this court. In His Majesty's decree, the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court are only assistants." Yen Ruohai looked around and did not see the vice official of the Supreme Court. He smiled and said, "Since you are an assistant, you should do your part well. Yang Wanli and the other 3 have always been under our watch and have not yet been convicted. How can they be handed over to the Ministry of Justice? The Yamen laborers under the minister are too much of a scoundrel. Master Mu invited them back to the Overwatch Council. Is that wrong?" Guizheng said coldly, "Yang Wanli's case is fine. But according to the court's rules, Sir Fan Jr. was sent first by the Ministry of Justice. Of course, words of the Overwatch Council would not be enough to take him away. Until now, the 3 departments still did not know the true relationship between Fan Xian and the Overwatch Council. They only thought that because Fan Xian exposed the cheating case and came into contact with the Overwatch Council, in addition to his master-disciple relationship with Fei Jia, the Overwatch Council would want to protect him. Thus they first used the rules to suppress Yen Ruohai. Guizheng saw that he was not listening to the words of the Imperial Censorate, and he was furious. He thought, "Your rank is so much lower than mine, how dare you be so rude?" This Imperial Censorate rarely interacted with the Overwatch Council, so he had no idea how arrogant the council could be. Yen Ruohai frowned again. He looked at Han Jiwei and bowed. "Sir, I have been ordered to bring back Sir Fan Jr. Please make an exception." Han Jiwei saw that the Overwatch Council had arrived. He knew that this was going to be troublesome. His master probably did not expect Chen Pingping to interfere. But he had no other choice. He gritted his teeth and said, "The case has not been closed. How can I bring someone? Sir Yen, this is against the rules." He copied Guizheng's tone and used the court's rules to pressure others. Yen Ruohai frowned and waved his hand. Countless grunts sounded at the same time. In the hall of the Ministry of Justice, the wind of fists and the shadows of feet collided. The people of the 13 Yamens had no time to fight back. The people surrounding Fan Xian had already been disarmed and beaten to the ground. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. The 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council had always been the most powerful department in the Overwatch Council after the 5th Bureau. How could these bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice resist? Fan Xian found that it was finally quieter. He smiled and waved his sleeves. He walked to Yen Ruohai's side. Sorry for the trouble. I thought it would only be Wang Qinian. Han Jiwei slammed the table and stood up. To ignore the laws of the court like this, does the Overwatch Council want to rebel? Tomorrow I will write to His Majesty and sentence you to death. Yan Ruohai frowned and turned. According to the rules of the court, the officials of the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council only take orders from the Emperor. In an emergency they can temporarily avoid the law. Without a direct order from His Majesty, the 6 ministries, 3 bureaus and 2 houses cannot interrogate without permission. Have you forgotten this rule? Guojing laughed sinisterly. Sir Yan, of course the 3 bureaus would not dare to interrogate a big shot like this. But what does Sir Fan Jr. have to do with the Overwatch Council? Hu and Jingdo did not know who the 8 bureaus were. Who did not know? When did Sir Fan Jr. become one of the 8 bureaus? You should know that it takes 5 years for the Overwatch Council to be reinstated. Sir Fan Jr. is 17 this year. Could he have been in charge of the first bureau of the Overwatch Council when he was 12? No one would believe it, so Imperial Censor Gua and Minister Han were not worried that Fan Xian would dare step out of the door of the Ministry of Justice. If he did, then he would be in contempt of the law of the Qing Kingdom, a crime that could not be pardoned. Furthermore, Fan Xian had offended so many officials in the capital. Under the turbulent court discussions, even the Prime Minister and Minister Fan would not be able to protect him. His Majesty would have no choice but to punish him. Yan Ruohai looked at Fan Xian and smiled warmly. Fan Xian smiled. His fingers reached to his waist and untied the Rui ornament given to him by the Empress. He tossed it to an Overwatch Council official and then slowly pulled out a wooden tablet. The wooden tablet was slightly yellow with the words Commissioner written on it. He extended his hand straight towards Imperial Censor Gua and Minister Han. Both of them craned their necks forward to see what was written on the token. They were so shocked that they slumped back into their chairs. The wooden token was like a slap to the faces of these 2 high-ranking officials from afar. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. Goodbye, my lords. After saying this, he and Yan Ruohai walked slowly out of the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice under the protection of the Overwatch Council officials. Behind the table, Imperial Censor Gua's face was ashen. Minister Han leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. No one had expected Fan Xian to be a commissioner of the Overwatch Council. What was a commissioner? It was a transcendent existence above the 8 bureaus of the Overwatch Council. It was one of the most secretive positions in the council. Many officials in the court had speculated, but no one could have guessed that the commissioner, who was rumored to be incomparably sinister, was actually the same person as Fan Xian, who had a belly full of poetry and a face full of sunshine. What do we do? Han Jiwei opened his eyes and a cold light flashed in them. Neither the 6 bureaus nor the 3 bureaus have the right to interrogate the commissioner of the Overwatch Council unless His Majesty orders it. But you and I both know that His Majesty would never make such an order. Guojing frowned. Looking at the large group of people disappearing from the stone steps in front of the Ministry of Justice, he said coldly, "What a turtle made of iron. I can't even find a place to start. But I'm still curious. Why didn't Fan Xian reveal his identity at the beginning? Why did he have to come to the Ministry of Justice? Was he really not afraid that we would use the aces of the court to capture him before Yan Ruohai arrived?" Minister Han also did not understand, but there was great worry in the depths of his heart. Since he could not bite Fan Xian to death today, then what awaited him was certainly a powerful counterattack that was about to arrive. He sighed and thought of Fan Xian's final words of goodbye. He slowly savored a wave of bitterness and fear. He didn't know whether or not the power behind him could protect him. Walking out of the Ministry of Justice, Fan Xian calmly said, "The director forced me to reveal my identity. There was no need to play such a boring game." Yan Ruohai smiled slightly. The director believed that since he purposely wanted the people of the capital to know of your identity, then he needed to reveal it at the right place at the right time and in a relatively dramatic way. Today, in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice of the Kingdom of Qing, the scholars of the capital have gathered outside to voice their grievances for you. It is a great opportunity. Fan Xian shook his head and said nothing. In reality, today was a bit risky. If the powerful powers hidden behind the 6 ministries wanted to end this battle, they could have used even more ruthless methods. If it weren't for the obvious results of his training in the Tsong Mountains, he wouldn't have had the confidence to talk and laugh freely in the gloomy hall. The Overwatch Council is a secret service organization, so its reputation has never been good. Yen Ruohai quietly explained, so the director made the matter of you exposing the fraud case widely known, and took the lead in establishing your reputation. That way, once your identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council is exposed, the scholars and commoners will not feel fear and disgust when they think of you. So, it was just an image-building project. Fan Xian took a deep breath. The depression in his chest had not yet dissipated. There would be time to think about it in detail in the future. Yen Ruohai did not understand what this young commissioner meant. He took the small jade rui ornament that Fan Xian had taken off earlier from the hands of a subordinate and handed it to him. Fan Xian placed the rui in his palm and gently stroked it. Suddenly he asked, Wanner entered the palace to explain to the crown prince. Furthermore, I believe that this spring examination did not damage the crown prince's reputation. Given the crown prince's personality, he should not be so unyielding. Before Minister Han suddenly became ruthless. Who in the Eastern Palace was he relying on? Yen Ruohai smiled. If it wasn't the crown prince, then it was the empress. The empress. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He thought that he had offended more and more people, but he didn't know if the empress was dealing with him because of the reason he was afraid of. He clenched the jade rui ornament in his hand. Thinking that this ornament had been given to him by the empress, he unconsciously wanted to throw it away. Yen Ruohai smiled and reminded him. You can do whatever you want with a gift from the palace. That is a great crime. Fan Xian smiled. Thank you for the reminder. But now that my identity as the commissioner is known to the world, which Yamen would dare to interrogate me? The Yamen wouldn't dare, but the palace would. Yen Ruohai gently patted his shoulder. He found that this young man was even younger than his own son. He shook his head and sighed. Fan Xian nodded in acknowledgement. He then said sincerely, Please do not worry, Sir Yen, on this trip to Northern Qi. I will bring you back safely. Thank you, said Yen Ruohai. Walking out of the Ministry of Justice, the scholars and commoners who had been surrounding the street saw Sir Fan, who had bravely uncovered a case of fraud, walk out safely and burst into cheers. Fan Xian smiled and thanked them. Only now did he understand why he had behaved so arrogantly in front of the Ministry of Justice today. It was because he had finally done something that he believed to be absolutely correct. It was like a line he had read in novels in his previous life. What was the right path? The right path was to do what was right, what one believed to be right. This feeling was very good, very powerful. Chapter 176. News of what happened at the Ministry of Justice quickly spread throughout the capital. The expected counterattack of the Overwatch Council, the Prime Minister and Minister Fan against the Ministry of Justice and the Imperial Censorate did not begin immediately. This was beyond the expectations of all the officials. During the palace examination, the Emperor of Qing finally made his stance clear. The people Fan Xian had taken a liking to were all chosen into the second rank. As for the Zhuangyuan, Bang Yan and Tanhua, they were, not surprisingly, given to some long-established scholars. Furthermore, Fan Xian knew that the names of these three had appeared on those slips of paper. When he had pasted their names, he had tampered with them. His Majesty's stance on the exam hall fraud case was even more obvious in the specific circumstances of the court examination. During the banquet, the officials were surprised to see Fan Xian, a fifth-level scholar of the Imperial College, sitting uneasily in the front row, to the right of the Crown Prince and the Second Prince. He smiled shyly as if he had not drunk today, so he was not as wild as he had been the night he had spat out 300 poems. He was not used to the feeling of being watched by so many people. After Fan Xian had caused trouble at the Ministry of Justice, the officials in the capital had long known his true identity. They also knew that the Overwatch Council had used Fan Xian as a pretext to make a fuss. They had used Fan Xian's privilege as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council to strip the faces of the Minister of Justice Han Jiwei and the Imperial Censorate Guo Zheng. It was also rumored that there had been a disturbance in the palace that night. The commissioner of the Overwatch Council was a very sinister position. The officials still found it difficult to connect Fan Xian, who controlled countless secret agents and secretly controlled the lives of officials. But no matter what, when the officials looked at Fan Xian now, they no longer saw him as a civil official, a son of a powerful family with a powerful background. For the first time they truly felt Fan Xian's power. After the palace examination, the cheating case in the spring examinations was still under the jurisdiction of the Overwatch Council. Slowly but surely it was being investigated. Commissioner Fan, on the other hand, had quieted down. Those who knew the inside story guessed that Fan Xian was preparing for his diplomatic mission in a few days. On the 3rd of the 3rd month, the court examination ended, the banquet ended, and the flower arrangement ended. Yang Wanli, Ho Jichong, Qing Jialin, and Shi Chanli, these 4 scholars who had suddenly been blessed by the heavens, finally found an opportunity to sit uneasily in a carriage and arrive at the gate of Fan Manor on the southern street of the city. Yang Wanli raised his head to look at the lavish facade of Fan Manor. He glanced nervously at the ferocious stone lion crouching by the door and mumbled, "I'm a little nervous." Ho Jichong was the calmest of the 4, but this was the first time he had come to such a luxurious manor, so he was a bit nervous. He forced a smile and said, "I've seen Sir Fan Jr. before. Not only is he young and promising, his way of talking is also very interesting. He's not like the other officials in the court who are hateful. What are you nervous about?" Qing Jialin stood to the side and didn't know what to say. A few days ago the Ministry of Justice and the Overwatch Council had caused a ruckus. Logically speaking, the 4 of them had already been put under Fan Xian's tutelage. The palace examination had passed. No matter what, they should come to the manor to pay their respects. Going back to that day at Tongfu Tavern, the 4 scholars had suddenly discovered that the most terrifying Overwatch Council in the kingdom of Qing had fought with the bailiffs of the 13 yamens for their sake. They had almost been scared to death. Shi Chanli's temperament was the most gentle and carefree. This time he hadn't passed, so he was much more relaxed than his 3 friends. He pointed at them and laughed. "I can see that you are all quite nervous, but it's probably not because you're visiting your teachers. It's because you've discovered that Sir Fan Jr. has suddenly become the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Brother Zhu, am I right?" Yang Wanli looked at the stone lion again and smiled bitterly. No one would have guessed that in less than 2 days, the immortal poet Fan Xian would suddenly become one of the most powerful officials in the Overwatch Council. It's not like you don't know how frightening the Overwatch Council is. The officials in the court have always been wary of it. Sir Fan Jr. joining the Overwatch Council has not been a good thing. That's just the prejudice of ignorant people. Shi Chanli smiled and said, "That day in Tongfu Inn, you also said that the Overwatch Council is very beneficial in supervising the governance of officials." He turned to the somewhat disapproving Ho Jichong. "After Minister Guo went to prison, you also raised your cup for the Overwatch Council. What's wrong? Now that you've discovered that your teacher is a high-ranking official of the Overwatch Council, you're acting like ordinary people and wanting to keep a respectful distance?" Yang Wanli sighed. The whole world knows that Sir Fan Jr. was the main contributor to the scandal of the spring examination. It was only later that we realized that he had been working for the Overwatch Council all along. Sir Fan Jr.'s actions have not only shaped the futures of the 3 of us. More importantly, it has created a slightly fairer path for the scholars of the world. Everyone is grateful. Even after knowing that he is the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, no scholar dares to show him the slightest disrespect. As for you and me, there's no need to say more. Even if Sir Fan Jr. stays in the Overwatch Council in the future, we still have to follow him. Brother Shi, you don't need to say more. I've already made up my mind. Ho Jichong smiled. That's right. It's just a pity that, according to the rules of the court, any leader of the special agents of the Overwatch Council can no longer enter the cabinet. It's a pity for Sir Fan Jr.'s talent. At this moment Qing Jialin had a chance to interject. Sir Fan Jr. still has that identity. His official career has never been able to flourish. I hear that next year he will be in charge of the Royal Merchant's Palace Treasury, so it's not a pity that he can enter the Overwatch Council. Everyone understood that he was talking about Fan Xian's identity as the princess's son-in-law. When they thought about how this extremely young teacher of theirs had so many identities, they all felt it was strange. The 4 of them discussed in low voices at the gate of Fan Manor for a long time. Finally, they got rid of some of their nervousness and walked toward Fan Manor, handing over the name cards they had prepared. The gatekeeper of Fan Manor had long since noticed these 4 people who looked like scholars. He took the name cards with a face full of suspicion and found that they were the 4 people who had been rumored in the capital for a long time. The servants of Fan Manor all knew that their young master had accepted 4 new students. So it was these 4 people in front of them. They respectfully invited them into the gatekeeper's room and served them tea. The 4 of them knew that this was the custom of a noble family. Whenever a guest came, they had to first drink tea in the gatekeeper's room. Unexpectedly, after a short while, the gatekeeper reported back with a face full of embarrassment. "The young master has gone out today. He is not in the manor. Would you like to leave a message or perhaps come back another day?" The 4 of them couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. But deep down they couldn't help but relax. At that moment an official's sedan chair stopped by the side door. The gatekeeper hurried forward to greet it. A middle-aged official with a solemn expression stepped out of the sedan chair. His eyes were soft and full of spirit. As he walked past the gatekeeper's room, he stopped and looked at the 4 scholars. The gatekeeper saw that his master had stopped and was about to introduce him, but his master waved his hand and turned to the 4 scholars. "Which one of you is Yang Wanli? Who is Shirchanli? Who is Hojichang? Who is Qingjialan?" Hojichang was shocked. He thought that this man knew who the 4 of them were without asking, and he didn't just ask for their names. He didn't leave out any of them. It seemed that he didn't want to give them the impression of favoritism. For such a clear-minded person to know without thinking, he must be Sir Fan Jr.'s father. He quickly bowed. "I am Hojichang. Greetings, Minister." The 3 scholars beside him came to their senses. Knowing that the man in front of them was Sir Fan Jr.'s father, they hurriedly bowed as well. Count Sinan smiled and looked at Hojichang. "It seems that Fan Xian has a good eye," he said with some approval. "He's not home. If you don't mind him being long-winded, why don't you accompany me into the manor for a chat?" This was their teacher's father. How should they address him? Although the 4 scholars were the rising power of the kingdom of Qing's officialdom, they didn't dare say anything in front of this wily old minister. They obediently followed him into the manor. The ugliest building on Tianhe Road was still silent in the spring light. The famous falling flowers and running water on either side of the road had no petals. Because it was still early in the spring, the flowers had not yet fully bloomed. Naturally, they didn't want to throw their clothes into the water. The common people of the capital still followed the old rules, staying far away from the Overwatch Council. The stone tablet in front of the gate quietly watched them as if to say, "The council is here to protect you. Why are you so afraid?" Don't ask why the common people were afraid of the Overwatch Council. Just like Yang Wanli and the other scholars, people's fear of secret agencies was always without reason. It was because there seemed to be no light in the Yamen, only secrets and darkness. In the square-shaped room of the Overwatch Council, the 7 leaders were sitting at the long table, holding their breaths and calming their spirits. They knew that today's meeting was special, so their gazes toward the crippled director at the end of the long table were filled with doubt. After the head of the first bureau Zhu Gu committed suicide in this room, the first bureau had been without a leader. Mu Tai was only temporarily in charge of his duties in the capital, so today there were only 7 people in the 8 bureaus. The door slid open quietly, but the 7 most powerful figures in the kingdom of Qing sensed it. They unconsciously turned their heads to look at the door. Even Qin Pingping at the end of the table slowly raised his head, his eyes calm and spirited. An old man with slightly brown eyes and a head full of messy hair walked in. Everyone was slightly surprised, but they saw Fei Jie turn around and say quietly, "An ugly daughter-in-law has to see her parents-in-law. Come in. What are you waiting for?" The young man behind him came out, a little embarrassed. The young man's face was delicate and amiable, and his face was full of a shy smile. He cupped his hands and bowed to the leaders of the Overwatch Council around the table. He said quietly, a little embarrassed, "Good morning, everyone. I am Fan Xian." Chapter 177. The meeting room of the Overwatch Council fell into an awkward silence. No one had expected Commissioner Fan's first appearance in the Overwatch Council to be in such a situation. It was completely at odds with the usual somber atmosphere of the Overwatch Council. After a while, someone finally couldn't help but laugh. Fan Xian smiled, cupped his hands and walked inside. Of the 7 powerful figures present, he only recognized Yan Ruohai. The others were all unfamiliar. Fortunately, Fei Jie had been by his side all day, Otherwise he would have been afraid to face the most sinister and terrifying spies in the kingdom of Qing alone. At the end of the long table there was an old man sitting in a wheelchair. His eyes were cold, but they were very gentle as he looked at Fan Xian. For no reason, Fan Xian sighed in his heart and slowly walked forward. He had recognized him long ago. After all, he had seen him 16 years ago when he first came to this world. In those 16 years, the old cripple's face did not seem to have changed much. Qin Pingping looked at the young man who was getting closer and closer to him, and a strange but satisfied expression appeared on his face. Fan Xian had already reached his side. Qin Pingping opened his arms and said softly, "Child, come here." Fan Xian slowly lowered his body and put his head gently on the old man's shoulder. He put his body into the other man's not very wide chest and hugged him lightly. Qin Pingping was very thin and the contact between their bodies was gentle, but Fan Xian felt very warm. The old man and the young man hugged each other as if the spies of the kingdom of Qing did not exist. Let them be presumptuous for a while. After a long time the two slowly separated. Fan Xian bowed respectfully. "I finally meet you." Qin Pingping suddenly let out two extremely sharp laughs. His laughter seemed to be extremely happy. Other than Fei Jia, the other 7 spies who did not know the inside story, maintained a polite silence. But deep down they were shocked. No one knew what kind of relationship this commissioner had with the director, who had always lived in seclusion. Today was Fan Xian's first official day in the Overwatch Council as a commissioner, so the members of the 8 bureaus were waiting here. After a simple self-introduction, Fan Xian quietly sat in the chair to Qin Pingping's left. Fei Jia sat to Qin Pingping's right. "He is Fan Xian." Qin Pingping looked at his subordinates and quietly said, "In the future I will be the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Everyone please support me." When Dean Qin introduced the new members, he had never been as serious as he was today, and he had never said so many words. The 7 leaders all knew the weight of these words. They stood and bowed formally to Fan Xian without saying anything more. From the time Fei Jia began teaching Fan Xian at the age of 5, Fan Xian knew that something must have happened between him and the secret service organization that the world feared and the common people avoided. Especially after learning of his mother's relationship with the council, he knew that one day he would also have a very strange relationship with the council. When he was young, he had learned a lot about the Overwatch Council's organizational setup and workflow from Fei Jia. After entering the capital, he had done a lot of things and cooperated with the Overwatch Council. He had also independently formed the Qinian unit outside the council. Now that he had formally heard this explanation, his understanding of the Overwatch Council had naturally deepened. The Overwatch Council was a secret service organization directly under the Emperor. Its power was outside of the 6 ministries and it was not limited by Qing law. It only acted according to imperial edict. It was divided into 8 bureaus. The first bureau was responsible for monitoring the officials in the capital, and many spies were placed in important departments. It was the most important department of the Overwatch Council. Its previous leader was Zhu Gu, who had secretly sided with the eldest princess and had died a few months ago. The second bureau was responsible for gathering and analyzing information from various departments, as well as making plans for the emperor and the military. The third bureau was the department that Fan Xian felt closest to. Before his teacher Fei Jia retired, he had always been the head of the third bureau. The third bureau was responsible for developing drugs and all kinds of unorthodox weapons. The drugs, poisons, and aphrodisiacs that Fan Xian had on him were basically the results of the third bureau's research. The fourth bureau was Yan Ruohai's department. It was responsible for monitoring the officials of the various provinces outside of the capital, as well as collecting relevant intelligence. Its scope of power extended far beyond the borders of the country, including parts of northern Qi and Dongyi. In terms of authority, it was the most powerful department in the Overwatch Council aside from the first bureau. The fifth bureau of the Overwatch Council had always been stationed outside the capital. It was established by His Majesty himself, and was responsible for protecting Qin Pingping's safety. When necessary, it could also carry out 1,000-mile raids by cavalry. Years ago, when they penetrated deep into northern Wei and captured the spy leader Xiao En, that was the most glorious achievement of the Fifth Bureau. It could be said that this department was the most powerful in the Overwatch Council. The Sixth Bureau was the least famous, but also the most terrifying department. Even though Fan Xian had been in the capital for so long, he had not had much contact with it. This was because the 6th Bureau was responsible for dealing with assassinations. Of course, on the other hand, the 6th Bureau was also responsible for protecting the people chosen by the emperor. The 7th Bureau was responsible for interrogating and imprisoning enemies. It was a more professional existence than the 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice. The inconspicuous head of the prison that Fan Xian had seen in the Overwatch Council's prison was the former head of the 7th Bureau. The 8th Bureau. Fan Xian wanted to laugh when he saw the middle-aged official. This was probably the department that he had dealt with the most in the Overwatch Council. The Donbo bookstore did not skimp on paying tribute to the 8th Bureau. Although he had connections, 7th Yi shopkeeper still carefully paid tribute to the 8th Bureau every month. This department, in Fan Xian's opinion, was similar to the yamen of his previous life, except that it had more power and was more independent. After the brief introductions, the 7 leaders of the Overwatch Council did not need Fan Xian to introduce himself. Fan Xian's background was too clear, too glorious. Everyone in the Qin Kingdom knew about it. Furthermore, these 7 were as cunning as foxes, as vicious as wolves, and as fierce as tigers. Of these 7 leaders, Fan Xian only recognized Yan Ruohai. He was more interested in the leaders of the 6th and 3rd Bureau. During the introductions, the leader of the 6th Bureau, who was responsible for assassinations, added the word representative. Fan Xian was a bit curious. Where was the most powerful assassin in the Qin Kingdom? As for why he was curious about the leader of the 3rd Bureau, it was because Fei Jie had been talking about him out of boredom. This leader, whose surname was Leng, was actually Fei Jie's head disciple. Fan Xian should have called him elder brother instead. After the meeting ended, Leng of the 3rd Bureau and Yan Ruohai of the 4th Bureau stayed behind. Fan Xian and Leng huddled together and whispered for a while. When it came to poisons and hidden weapons, they couldn't help but be exuberant. Yan Ruohai watched from the side and felt his hair stand on end. Only then did he remember that this commissioner was Fei Jie's last disciple, and also a little monster who grew up with poisons. In the future it would be best if he didn't get too close to him. Seeing the two of them talking happily, Fei Jie frowned. What kind of person is Xiao En? He has already calculated all of this. I reckon that after the diplomatic mission enters Northern Qi, he will request to stay at Wudu for a month. Under the protection of Northern Qing, he will confirm that there is no remaining poison in his body, and only then will he go to the capital to exchange hostages. Even I can't concoct a poison that can last for a month and take effect at a fixed time. What's the point of you whispering about it for so long? Fan Xian and this big brother, whom he had met for the first time, looked at each other and sighed dejectedly. They cupped their hands and bid farewell, knowing that Fei Jie was right. Qin Pingping gently clapped his hands, gathering the attention of those who remained in the room. On this trip to Northern Qi, he said quietly, there are 4 missions. Fan Xian sat down and listened intently. First, ensure that Yan Bingyun returns safely and takes over his post in the 1st Bureau. Second, after the exchange of hostages is complete and the agreement between the 2 countries is made, immediately kill Xiao En. Qin Pingping seemed to be speaking of a very ordinary matter. Third, carry out the Red Sleeve Plan. The details of this plan will be given to you in a moment. Fourth, on the basis of completing the first 3 missions, consolidate the spy network in Northern Qi. Ensure that intelligence work will not be delayed because of Yan Bingyun's departure. Each of the 4 missions was more difficult than the last. Fan Xian's face was calm, but in his heart he felt a faint excitement and unease. Qin Pingping expressionlessly turned to Yan Ruohai and said, prepare the relevant information. Then before Fan Xian leaves, give him an explanation. Yan Ruohai nodded and left the room. At this moment only Fan Xian, Qin Pingping and Fei Jie were left in the room. After a long period of silence, Qin Pingping's hands gently smoothed out the creases in the blanket on his knees. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at Fan Xian. I believe that when you saw the name outside the courtyard, you should have learned many things. Uncle Wu Zhu said a bit. Fan Xian smiled as he looked at the crippled old man in front of him. A very complicated feeling welled up in his heart. Although a large part of his life had been arranged by this old man, for some reason Fan Xian could not feel the kind of conflict that most people would have. Instead he felt a strange kind of trust, as if this most terrifying official in the kingdom of Qing was worthy of his trust. This was intuition, and Fan Xian had always trusted and respected his intuition. Bao. Qin Pingping closed his eyes and frowned as if lost in some kind of memory. Suddenly he said, "Has his memory gotten better?" Fan Xian said quietly, "Perhaps he remembers what he should remember and forgets what he doesn't want to remember." Fei Jie coughed twice and glared at the student. He thought that there was really no need to say such mysterious words in front of the principal. It was very annoying. Chapter 178. Qin Pingping gave a shrill laugh and rubbed his rough fingers together. "Is Sir Wu in the capital right now?" Fei Jie had asked this question on Fan Xian's wedding night. Fan Xian shook his head and answered just like last time. "I heard he went to the south to find Yi Luyun. I don't know when he'll be back." For some reason, Fan Xian seemed to faintly hear a regretful sigh coming from a dark corner of the room. He frowned, and the fingers in his sleeves tightened around his crossbow. What the three of them were talking about was too frightening. No matter who heard it, for Fan Xian and Qin Pingping, it would be difficult to bear the consequences. "Come out." Qin Pingping seemed to see the reaction in his sleeves. "I think you must be very curious about who the true head of the 6th Bureau is." With these words, a person, or more accurately, a black shadow, floated out from the dark corner of the room. It was so ethereal that it did not seem to be immortal. This black shadow floated behind Qin Pingping and gradually revealed itself. It was a man covered from head to toe in black. A strong man. Fan Xian sensed the aura that the other party was deliberately emitting. His pupils shrank and his entire body tensed up, then slowly relaxed. He had seen this person before. 16 years ago, this shadow-like assassin had stood on Qin Pingping's carriage, swept past like a hawk, and killed a mysterious sorcerer in an instant. He is the head of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He never sees outsiders. Fei Jie smiled. "Of course you are not an outsider." The head of the Qing Kingdom's assassins did not say anything. He stood silently behind Qin Pingping as if he had no interest in Fan Xian. Qin Pingping's voice was a bit hoarse. He continued Fei Jie's words. "Aside from Sir Wu, he is the most terrifying assassin in the world. Of course, he is also the best protector. That is why I am still alive today." The black shadow bowed slightly, expressing his thanks to the old man in the wheelchair for his praise. Qin Pingping looked into Fan Xian's eyes and smiled slightly. The shadow is Sir Five's admirer and follower. In fact, many of his techniques were learned many years ago when he was still young. He saw Sir Five's methods and gradually imitated them. Thus, when he heard you say Sir Five was not in the capital, he was a bit disappointed. When Fan Xian looked at the shadow assassin again, his eyes were different. Just by imitating Wuzhu he had such power. This #1 assassin of the kingdom of Qing was truly a genius. Of course, this meant that the blind Wuzhu was even more terrifying. Fei Jie pushed Director Chen's wheelchair into the large courtyard at the back of the Overwatch Council. The shadow disappeared again into the light of day. No one knew where he had gone. Fan Xian followed closely behind the wheelchair, feeling a little strange. The most powerful assassin in the kingdom of Qing was quite similar to Wu Zhu's style. He hadn't seen Wu Zhu for many days. Although he wasn't worried, he was about to leave and he wanted to see the person closest to him. This was the first time Fan Xian had entered the heavily guarded back courtyard of the Overwatch Council. The courtyard was extremely wide and there were no tall buildings within dozens of feet of the walls, so no one could see what was going on in the courtyard from the outside. Completely different from what people imagined, the back of the Overwatch Council was a beautiful place. Green grass could be seen everywhere and several towering trees cast their shadows on the ground. Small wildflowers could be seen on the side of the bluestone path. The employees of the Overwatch Council walked silently between the different buildings. When they saw the black wheelchair from afar, they would bow respectfully. And every time they walked a certain distance, Fan Xian would frown. Beneath the beautiful fake mountains and in the tender undergrowth, there seemed to be hidden spies everywhere. The security was much tighter than that of the palace. Familiarize yourself with this place. In the future, this courtyard is yours. Qin Pingping said this very casually and suddenly. It felt as easy as throwing a steamed bun to Fan Xian. Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. Although he had long known about this arrangement, he still hadn't expected the old cripple to say it so simply. Qin Pingping frowned at him, shook his head and sighed. Fan Xian didn't know why he sighed. He smiled and said, I have a few questions. Let's hear them. The wheelchair stopped next to a shallow pond. The water was clear and golden fish could be seen swimming freely in the water. Qin Pingping stared at the water. I have offended many people in the exam hall case, but why did Imperial Censor Gua and Minister Han dare to act against me? Are they not afraid of the wrath of my father and the Prime Minister? Fan Xian looked at Qin Pingping's messy hair and quietly said, in the Eastern Palace, if not the Crown Prince's orders, why would the Empress act against me? Qin Pingping didn't turn around. He waved his hand. Fei Jie smiled and patted his student on the shoulder, expressing his appreciation for his courage. He then left the pond. Fan Xian stepped forward to take over his teacher's position, and pushed the wheelchair along the small pond. Qin Pingping was silent for a moment. Are you forcing me to lay my cards on the table? You should at least let me know how much they know about us. Qin Pingping laughed shrilly. What a cautious young man. It seems that you have guessed some things and are afraid that the Empress is acting against you because of those things. Fan Xian smiled. Yes, if the Empress really does know what I have guessed, then it is only natural that she would act against me. That is the only reason I can think of. The problem is that if that is the case, my current strength is not enough to stand against the Eastern Palace. The enemy is all paper tigers, Qin Pingping suddenly said. Fan Xian hadn't expected to hear this from the other's mouth and couldn't help but be shocked. Then he heard Qin Pingping say lightly, this is what your mother said in the past. She also said that we should look down on the enemy strategically, and pay attention to the enemy tactically. Fan Xian felt like laughing. This cripple certainly didn't know that the original author of these words was not his mother. Qin Pingping smiled. And your biggest problem right now is that you pay too much attention to the enemy strategically. You are even afraid of the enemy, so your hands and feet are tied. Think back to that day in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice. Even if you fought your way out, who would dare to do anything to you? And on the tactical level, you think too little. If it weren't for the council cleaning up after you, the things you have done since you entered the capital would have been enough to kill you 100 times over. Fan Xian was speechless. Qin Pingping gently crossed his hands on his thighs. Don't think too highly of the Eastern Palace. In the entire kingdom of Qing, there is no truly powerful force, including the Prime Minister and your father Fan Jian. Fan Xian seemed to understand. Violence is true power, so only the military and the Overwatch Council are truly powerful. Qin Pingping raised a hand and shook it with a long, old finger. No, in the entire kingdom of Qing, there is only one truly powerful person. Fan Xian lowered his head and quietly said, it is the Emperor. Qin Pingping smiled. Correct. His Majesty can ignore everything. As long as he still holds the military power of the world in his hands, he can do whatever the officials and harem want. He won't even bat an eyelid. Fan Xian smiled mockingly and said, what a leisurely emperor. Qin Pingping rubbed his somewhat dry hands. The Overwatch Council is His Majesty's, he said slowly. I am only acting in charge. In the future you will also be acting in charge. Remember this. Fan Xian looked calmly at the head of the Kingdom of Qing's Secret Service. He didn't know whether or not he should doubt his rumored loyalty to the emperor. The black wheelchair had been circling around the shallow pond for a long time. The golden fish in the water were a little dizzy, and they slowly sank to the bottom of the pond. Ignoring the boring old man and the young man, they began to play with the fine sand with their mouths. The officials of the Overwatch Council watched from afar as the director and Commissioner Fan talked in secret. They didn't dare disturb them. Qin Pingping suddenly sighed. Time always passes quickly. In the blink of an eye, your mother's son is already so big. Fan Xian was startled. What did he mean by his mother's son? Why didn't he just say he was married? He smiled bitterly. I only regret that I don't know what my mother looked like. Qin Pingping smiled. There is only one portrait of your mother in the world. It was secretly painted by a master painter. In the end, that master painter was almost killed by Sir Wu. Fan Xian smiled. That painting isn't in the palace, is it? Qin Pingping didn't answer directly. He only faintly said, you don't need to worry too much about the Eastern Palace. As I said before, the Empress's power was pretty much eliminated by His Majesty 12 years ago. Fan Xian knew the story of the night the capital bled. He frowned. Why didn't His Majesty abolish the Empress? After all, she is the Crown Prince's mother, and she has always been favored by the Empress Dowager. Most importantly, Qin Pingping said with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. Our Majesty, where else could he find another Empress with no power behind her, and such a stupid one at that? Fan Xian felt a chill in his heart. That Emperor really wasn't a good person. Fortunately, Qin Pingping didn't know what he was thinking about His Majesty. He still spoke gently. Don't worry about people discovering your identity. The death of that baby 16 years ago was an unchangeable fact in the palace. The stupid Empress had Minister Han make a move on you because she was thinking from the Crown Prince's point of view. At the time, she didn't know you were the Commissioner of the Overwatch Council. She was only angry at you for meeting the second prince on the pleasure boat. Qin Pingping frowned a little angrily. I believe Count Sinan told you not to get too close to these princes. Did you think that the nobles of the capital would not know about your meeting on the pleasure boat? Fan Xian smiled awkwardly. When he was in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice, he really did not think that the Empress had used the Ministry of Justice's fire stick to warn him because she was afraid of the second prince. At the time, he had thought that she knew about his past. Chapter 179. Qin Pingping gently plucked a small pink flower and carefully pinned it to the end of his hair. Seeing that the flower was trembling as if it would fall at any moment, he quickly used his fingers to press the old man's hair together so that the flower would be more stable. Qin Pingping smiled happily and gently patted Fan Xian's hand. After 16 or 17 years of struggle, you've finally come to the capital and grown up. I can finally answer to your mother. Fan Xian had always been curious about the story of the past. He couldn't help but ask, how many of you were there? He was naturally asking about the powerful people who had followed his mother and wanted to change the world. You can count for yourself. Fan Xian counted on his fingers and smiled. 6. Your mother was a very powerful person. Qin Pingping smiled. It seems that you are quite smart. About the first sentence, Teacher Fei Jia already said it to me when I was very young. I don't think he said it, but we all miss your mother. In some ways she was my guide. A little surprised. Fan Xian smiled. But I can guess a little. Be more respectful to Count Sinan and be nicer to the Fan family. Qin Pingping suddenly became very serious. They have done a lot for you. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids. To be able to protect the life of a little infant under such strange circumstances, to make the people in the palace believe that he was dead without even asking. His father must have done a lot. He said, who is the real enemy I need to guard against? Can't be that crazy eldest princess. She was still very young at the time. The eldest princess is just a poor woman. To the people of the royal family, the young lady's brilliance is too dazzling. She has lived under your mother's shadow all her life. She prides herself on her intelligence and ability, and has obtained many benefits for the kingdom of Qing. But in the end she was never as important as your mother in His Majesty's heart. As for the enemy, there is no enemy, there is no enemy. Qin Pingping softly repeated as if trying to convince himself. First in charge of the Overwatch Council, then in charge of the palace treasury. I think there will always be people who will feel that something is wrong. Fan Xian smiled. What do you want me to do? Qin Pingping quietly said, don't you want to be a powerful official? Fan Xian looked calmly into Qin Pingping's eyes and suddenly said, I think I know what you want to do. Qin Pingping's expression did not change. He smiled and said, I hope you will always pretend that you don't know what I want to do. Fan Xian frowned. Although I don't have any blood ties with them, I still don't want to see too many people shed blood. It's still early. Qin Pingping said softly, moreover, when it comes to bloodshed, it's often the stupid people who first pull out their knives and want to cut someone else's neck, but accidentally cut their own neck instead. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. Although he respected and trusted this old man, he had to walk his own path. Since entering the capital, he had maintained a tacit understanding with the director of the Overwatch Council, who had done many things for him. But if something really did happen in the future that caused the two of them to think differently, Fan Xian would choose to respect his own intentions first. Qin Pingping waved his hand and furrowed his brows. In the future you have to learn to open your eyes a bit more. Don't always focus on one ministry, one department and a mere official in Jingdo. You have to learn to stand higher. Fan Xian smiled. Do I have to set my eyes on the world? Qin Pingping smiled. Perhaps even higher. Fan Xian did not understand. Go. On this trip to Northern Qi be careful. Qin Pingping coughed and took the pink flower from his hair. He gently rubbed it between his fingers and said quietly, Xiao En is going to die. Of course you have to ensure your own safety first. Apart from that, do as you see fit with the other 3 missions. If the situation permits, you can try to find out where the temple is. After all, in this world, only Ku He, the imperial advisor of Northern Qi, has ever made contact with the temple. Fan Xian frowned. The temple, it's too sudden. I don't seem to have much confidence, although I do like to take risks. Qin Pingping nodded. Your mother also liked to take risks. But I really don't worry about your life or death. If you still can't crawl back from Northern Qi alive after Sir Wu has taught you for so many years, then I will express my disappointment in you at your funeral. The old man smiled and sprinkled the flower petals between his fingers on the ground. How could a young man like him deal with the real enemy? After saying goodbye to his mother's old comrade, Fan Xian returned to the building and met with Yen Ruohai. He took some files and prepared to go back to the manor to study them. Northern Qi was in an unusually complicated situation. Even if Qin Pingping wanted to use this matter to give Fan Xian real control of the Overwatch Council, if Fan Xian did not want to, no one could force him to go to that strange country. But Fan Xian really wanted to go. In his previous life he had been imprisoned in a sickly body without control. In this life he had been imprisoned in a strange life without control. This was a rare opportunity for him to go to Northern Qi, where he could fly freely in the sky and crawl freely in the sea. How could Fan Xian let go of this opportunity to be presumptuous? So he earnestly asked Yen Ruohai about the things he should pay attention to on this trip, and asked about the people he needed to pay attention to in Northern Qi. Yen Ruohai shook his head and looked at the young commissioner. It seemed he didn't know why Fan Xian was so passionate about this matter. Northern Qi has always been unstable. The Empress Dowager is too young and the Emperor is too young. But after the war last year it seems that their capital has stabilized a lot. Sir Commissioner, there are 3 things you need to pay attention to. One is Friar He, another is Shongshan Hu, and the last is, of course, the rarely seen Imperial Advisor Ku He. Friar He? Fan Xian frowned. There was no Taoism in this world, so why was he called Friar He? Yen Ruohai didn't know what he was thinking, so he didn't explain. Friar He is a master of the rear party. Qing Jushu, whom Commissioner Fan killed last year, was his disciple. Shongshan Hu is a rare brave general in Northern Qi. He has always fought the barbarians in the snowy north. I heard that after Northern Qi was defeated last year, he was transferred back to the capital by the young emperor. Sir Commissioner, on this trip to Northern Qi, you must pay attention to him, because the council has always been suspicious of his teacher. As for Imperial Advisor Ku He, as one of the 4 great grandmasters, he shouldn't be involved in these worldly matters, but... He frowned. Ku He has accepted a disciple, and this year he has officially entered the world to train. Sir Commissioner, your name is known all over the world. You must be careful if they come to cause trouble. Fan Xian was startled. For some reason he thought of the prostitute sex he had read about in the novels of his previous life. Can't be a woman, can it? He asked with a wry smile. Yen Ruohai said expressionlessly, we don't know if it's a man or a woman. All we know is that in the past 3 months, this great grandmaster's disciple has traveled throughout Northern Qi and challenged countless high-ranking masters. There are even rumors that he is the legendary Tianmai one. He looked at Fan Xian and asked quietly, Sir Commissioner, do you know of the Tianmai one? Fan Xian felt that the term sounded familiar. Suddenly he had a flash of inspiration. When he was young, Fei Jie had mentioned it once. Later, when he was eavesdropping on the conversation between the eldest princess and Zhuang Mohan in Guangxin Palace, he had also heard it once. After listening to Yen Ruohai's explanation, Fan Xian frowned. A genius that only appears once every 500 years. The bloodline of the heavens. It's not like he's a bunch of leeks that grow in the fields. I don't believe it. Yen Ruohai nodded. According to the council's analysis, it is likely that Northern Qi, because of their successive defeats, Needs to create the image of an exceptional young master to increase the people's confidence. Fan Xian smiled. That's more likely. It's just like how the council has been trying to create the image of me as commissioner. What's that person's name? Hai Tang. Fan Xian felt a headache coming on. I hope it's a sissy, but please don't let it be a real sissy. The two of them chatted for a bit. Finally, Yen Ruohai looked at Fan Xian calmly, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes wrinkling weakly. He said quietly, regarding my son, I'll have to trouble you, Sir Commissioner. I told you at the gate of the Ministry of Justice, Fan Xian replied seriously. I will bring Master Yen safely back to Qing. After leaving the 4th Bureau's room, Wang Qinian, who had been waiting outside, hurried over and took the pile of files from Fan Xian's hands. Fan Xian looked ahead, but he spoke quietly to his confidant. I will definitely bring you to Northern Qi. Thank you for your trust, sir, Wang Qinian replied with a smile. If there were no other arrangements for this trip to Northern Qi, it would truly be a gilded, leisurely trip. No country in the world would dare to make a move on a diplomatic mission. Fan Xian shook his head and smiled. I'm bringing you because you're the fastest person in the Overwatch Council. Of course, that's excluding Zhong Zhui. Wang Qinian smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. Earlier he had gone to Zhong Zhui's place to catch up. He and Zhong Zhui used to be known as the two wings of the Overwatch Council. Later, Wang Qinian became content with administrative matters, so his position gradually became ordinary. Zhong Zhui had always been depressed. Now that Wang Qinian had become Commissioner Fan Xian's confidant, Zhong Zhui felt that his old friend had finally regained some of his former glory, and he was very happy. The head of the 3rd Bureau, Brother Ling, had long been waiting by the door of the secret room. Seeing Fan Xian arrive, he didn't say anything. He felt very cold. Pushing open the door and entering the secret room, he was greeted by a cool breeze. The wind wasn't fast and Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He immediately knew that this sort of well-ventilated place had nothing to do with making poison. Chief Ling glanced at his junior brother and suddenly grinned, saying, "Nice figure." Fan Xian looked at this senior disciple he had just met and shivered. He thought to himself, "No way?" Hearing his senior disciple's next words, Leader Ling yelled into the room, "Standard." Fan Xian was startled. Not long after, he saw 5 or 6 people push out a large table. On the table were a few boxes and a piece of clothing made of strange material. The 5 or 6 people looked at Fan Xian, their faces expressionless. Perhaps it was because they had been in a strange department like the 3rd Bureau for too long that they all seemed a bit wooden. But after a closer look, they couldn't help but show expressions of admiration. They said to Commissioner Fan, "Nice figure." Chapter 180. When these strange officials of the 3rd Bureau said that Fan Xian had a good figure, they meant that Fan Xian's figure was perfect, and would fit perfectly with the accessories developed by the 3rd Bureau. There was no need to change the size. Fan Xian put on the clothes and frowned. He remembered that night when he was 5 when Fei Jie had snuck into his bedroom. He seemed to be wearing the same clothes, which were especially resistant to tearing. Ling explained, "It is resistant to fire but not strong. It can effectively reduce the damage of sharp weapons, but if the opponent is wielding a mountain-splitting axe, you'd better hide." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and spread his hands. He found that the style was fashionable in the capital, but there was a hidden hoodie at the back. "Take out the crossbow." Ling immediately saw the crossbow on Fan Xian's left forearm. Fan Xian sighed and reluctantly put the crossbow that had accompanied him for 4 or 5 years, and rarely left his side, on the table. Ling looked at the thickness of his arm, opened a box on the table and took out a small black crossbow. He carefully placed it in his sleeve, adjusted it, and looked at the crossbow that Fan Xian had just taken out. He frowned. "What kind of crappy thing is this? It's a model from 7 years ago and you're still using it." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "As long as it's enough, I'm content." Ling carefully explained the structure and firing principle of the crossbow to his junior. "This is a repeating crossbow, but it's too small, so it can only hold 3 bolts. These 3 bolts are coated with A4 poison. You should understand that, junior." Fan Xian understood that the A4 poison of the 3rd Bureau was the venom of the golden melon plant. It could kill on contact with blood. He touched the trigger with his little finger and frowned. "I need a distance of 3 meters. It can only guarantee a distance of 3 meters. It can't guarantee that it will hit the eyes, throat or testicles, Ling said calmly. Leader Ling said calmly, as for your dagger, it is Marshal Uncle Fei's favorite short weapon. It is incomparably sharp. So you don't need to change it. There are some unorthodox weapons here as well as some supplementary tools. Since I don't know what kind of mission you'll be undertaking, you can choose for yourself. Fan Xian knew that this selection would have a great impact on his movements in Northern Qi, so he looked at it carefully for a long time. In the end he chose a few items, but he did not choose a wall-climbing claw that could shoot 30 meters into the air. An official of the Third Bureau was curious and said, Commissioner, although I do not know the specifics of the mission, I think it is unavoidable to go to the Northern Qi Royal Palace and see if there are any good things to bring back. The walls of the Northern Qi Royal Palace in Shangjing are no shorter than the Royal Palace in Jingdou. These words were very naive, very simple, very flattering, and made Fan Xian laugh. He looked at the intricately designed iron claws, shook his head and did not explain anything. In this world there was no one who could crawl better than him. When it comes to poisons, Uncle Fei said that your talent is far above that of the members of the Third Bureau, so we weren't prepared. Ling carefully checked Fan Xian's equipment and nodded with satisfaction. Fan Xian drooled and said, but I lack materials. Chief Ling's interest was piqued. What are you lacking? Makuzi, arsenic, strychnine and Nanhai camphor. Makuzi is too bitter and it does not match your plan this time, Chief Ling said curiously. Arsenic and strychnine are both very common. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. With my current status, it is not convenient for me to ask someone to buy these things for me. It is easy to attract attention. Then make some chloroform. Teacher tested it the year before last and it is very effective, Chief Ling said excitedly. It is better than strychnine. Fan Xian became even more excited and nodded. But arsenic is a must. I tried it in Danzhou and it is very effective. It reacts faster than arrow poison. As soon as the topic of poisons came up, the two of them became professionally excited. The officials of the Third Bureau next to them were all of the same kind, and so they surrounded them and began a heated discussion, debating which poison could make a person die the slowest and most painful death, and which poison could turn a widow living under a memorial arch into the most ferocious animal on Lujing River. In short, the Third Bureau of the Overwatch Council was a perverted department, and there lived a group of perverted people. After coming out of the Third Bureau, Wang Qinian found that Commissioner Fan was not as calm as usual. His delicate face carried a hint of excitement and a faint red as if he had done something. Fan Xian was beaming. Playing the scholar every day is too tiring. It is better to discuss practical life skills in a place like this. The perverted ancestor of the perverted Third Bureau, Mr. Fei Jia, was holding a cup of tea at the end of the corridor. He looked at his young student with a faint smile and a trace of satisfaction. Why don't you stay in the Third Bureau? Fei Jia said quietly as he walked forward with his student. Don't go to Northern Qi, don't be a court official and don't care about the palace treasury. It would be nice to spend the rest of your life in peace. Fan Xian was silent. He knew that his teacher was worried about him. You were very quiet when you were young but you knew what you wanted. Fei Jia's eyes were a bit turbid and the light brown color seemed a bit heavy. After entering the capital, your heart's guard has become even firmer. But power is something that can easily make you lose yourself. Are you clear about what you want? Fan Xian was silent for a while, then respectfully said, I know. Fei Jia suddenly cackled. If you want to walk that path, you must learn to kill, be willing to kill and enjoy killing. Fan Xian's face was bitter. I'm not a pervert. Fei Jia blinked his tired eyes and coughed. This world is very perverted. If you are not perverted, how can you play around? In front of Fei Jia, Fan Xian always felt that he was still the child with the porcelain pillow. He smiled sweetly. There are many ways to play around. Oh right. Teacher, why did the director sigh when he saw me? Perhaps he was a little disappointed. You are not as arrogant as the lady was? Fan Xian was worried. A good man does not compare himself to a woman. Having said this, he took his teacher by the hand and went to Yisher Tavern. Today he had to get drunk. The whole capital already knew of his relationship with the Overwatch Council, so there was no need to avoid it. But Wang Qinian, who was behind them, was panting as he held a pile of files. He knew that these files were top-secret intelligence, so he did not dare to be negligent. He did not dare to follow them to Esher Tavern to drink and have fun. He quickly called for his spies to be on guard, and uneasily rode the carriage to Fan Manor. The Crown Prince sat in the Eastern Palace with a gloomy expression. His hand gripped the wine cup tightly and his fingers trembled slightly. A moment later he spat out a sentence from between his teeth. Why do the women in the palace never learn to be content? Xin Shaoqing of Taichung Temple did not dare to interrupt. He knew that the Crown Prince was in a particularly bad mood today. Everything that had happened in the past few days had made the entire Eastern Palace angry and angry. Even the usually gentle Grand Tutor had lost his temper a few times. First, it was the spring examination scandal. In fact, the Eastern Palace had suffered the least in this scandal. Of the dozen or so officials who had been arrested, only a few truly belonged to the Eastern Palace. Although the fall of Gui Yu, the Minister of Rights, was an unbearable loss to the Crown Prince in the eyes of the officials, after the banquet, the Crown Prince discovered that Guo Baokuan seemed to listen to someone else. Gradually, he realized that the Guo family was actually on the eldest princess's side. So when Fan Xian brought down Gui Yu, the Crown Prince was not angry. On the contrary, he felt somewhat gratified. No one expected that Sir Fan Jr. was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Xin Qiwu frowned slightly. He had drunk with Fan Xian many times, but he had never imagined that the gentle Fan Xian was actually a high-ranking member of the Secret Service. Crown Prince Li Qingqian shook his head. The gloominess on his face did not fade. Fan Xian is a sensible man. He exposed the scandal mainly because of his duty. It is understandable that he did not communicate with me beforehand. As long as you look at the matter, Fan Xian has given me enough face. I will not blame him too much. Furthermore, Sister Wanner made a special trip to the palace that day and handed over Fan Xian's personally written letter. I believe he did not intentionally target me. Xin Qiwu and Fan Xian were good friends, and of course he hoped that the Eastern Palace would have a powerful ally like Fan Xian in the Overwatch Council. He nodded in agreement. Indeed. Although Commissioner Fan did not say anything before, he did everything he could to remedy the situation. Unfortunately, he is about to leave for Northern Qi. Otherwise, I would be able to arrange for him to visit the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince snorted and slammed his wine cup down on the table. He said angrily, even if he wants to see me now, would Fan Xian dare to confide in me? The Ministry of Justice incident has caused quite a stir. Although the Prime Minister and Minister Fan have not made any moves, do you think they do not know the relationship between Han Jiwei and me? I fear that the Fan family hates me more than enough, not to mention seeking refuge. Xin Qiwu was silent. He knew that the Crown Prince's handling of this matter was wise and prudent. Unfortunately, there were two masters of the Eastern Palace. Just as the master and the official were dissatisfied, they suddenly heard the eunuch outside announce in a loud voice, "The Empress has arrived." Xin Qiwu looked at the Crown Prince, indicating with his eyes that His Highness must control his emotions. He then rushed to kneel to the side, bowed to the Empress and left the palace. The Empress, who had a pair of phoenix eyes, quietly looked at her son and did not say a word. The Crown Prince sat to the side with a smile on his face, but he would not say anything first. The Empress bit her lower lip. A trace of disappointment and sadness flashed through her eyes. Suddenly, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.